The beating that changed baseball. On August 16, 1920, thousands of fans packed New York's Polo Grounds to watch the Cleveland Indians face the Yankees. Chapman was Cleveland's star shortstop, known for his quick reflexes and exceptional fielding. The afternoon game moved at a typical pace until the fifth inning when Chapman stepped to the plate. Yankees pitcher Carl Mays threw with a distinctive submarine delivery, releasing the ball from an unusually low angle. The ball, dirty and scuffed from previous plays, was difficult to see against the late afternoon shadows. Chapman leaned in slightly, preparing for the pitch. The baseball struck his head with such force that the sound echoed through the stadium. Many spectators, including the umpire, thought it had hit Chapman's bat. For a moment, Mays fielded what he believed was a bunted ball and threw to first base. Chapman took several steps toward first base, then suddenly stopped. He dropped to his knees, a look of confusion crossing his face. Blood began to seep from his left ear. Players from both teams rushed to his side as he collapsed onto the dirt infield. Team doctors reached him within seconds. The crowd fell silent as Chapman was helped to his feet, wobbling and disoriented. He attempted to walk off the field with assistance, but couldn't maintain his balance. At New York's St. Lawrence Hospital, doctors discovered his skull was fractured. The impact had driven bone fragments nearly an inch into his brain. Surgeons performed an emergency operation, removing a piece of his skull to relieve pressure. Chapman never regained consciousness. At 4:40 a.m. the following morning, he was pronounced dead. The 29-year-old became the only player in Major League Baseball history to die from an injury sustained during a game. The tragedy changed baseball forever. The league soon banned the spitball and other pitches that doctored the ball. More importantly, umpires began regularly replacing dirty balls with clean ones, making them easier for batters to see, a practice that continues to this day. Goalkeeper blocker gone. On November 29, 2017, spectators filled the small gymnasium in Barras, Brazil, to watch a regional futsal match. Santos Sousa was the 38-year-old goalkeeper for Flamengo de Piripiri, a team competing in the local amateur league. The indoor arena was humid, the crowd energetic as the match entered its final minutes. The referee's whistle cut through the noise. A penalty had been awarded to the opposing team. Santos Sousa positioned himself between the goalposts, bouncing slightly on his toes. His teammates stood silent at midfield. The opposing striker approached the ball with measured steps. The shot came hard and fast, aimed at the center of the goal. Santos Sousa didn't dive. Instead, he stepped forward, making himself large, and blocked the ball with his chest. The impact was solid but unremarkable. The ball deflected harmlessly away. The crowd erupted in cheers. Santos Sousa raised his arms in celebration. His teammates rushed toward him, congratulating him on the crucial save. For a few seconds, everything appeared normal. Then, without warning, his expression changed. A look of confusion crossed his face. He reached out to a teammate, who caught him as his legs gave way. His body went limp as he collapsed to the court floor. The celebration instantly turned to panic. Players from both teams signaled frantically for medical help. A team doctor reached him within seconds and began CPR. The gymnasium fell silent. Children in the crowd were ushered outside as the medical team continued resuscitation efforts. For nearly 20 minutes, they fought to restart his heart. Paramedics arrived and took over, applying a defibrillator. The electric shocks caused his body to jolt, but his heart showed no response. Despite their desperate efforts, Santos Sousa never regained consciousness. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Medical examiners later determined he had suffered sudden cardiac arrest, likely triggered by commotio cordis, a rare but fatal disruption of heart rhythm caused by a precise impact to the chest wall at a critical moment in the cardiac cycle. Lightning's sudden strike on the pitch. On October 10, 2018, dark clouds gathered over Banyumas, Indonesia, as two local teams competed on a municipal football field. Raharja, a 35-year-old midfielder for FBI Banyumas, moved across the pitch with the confident stride of a veteran player. The weather had been threatening all afternoon, with humid air and distant thunder, but officials allowed the match to continue. In the 70th minute of play, light rain began to fall. Players glanced upward, but the precipitation seemed manageable. Spectators opened umbrellas as they continued watching from the sidelines. No one recognized the danger as the storm intensified rapidly. At precisely 4:17 p.m., a brilliant flash illuminated the entire pitch. The bolt struck without warning. Video footage later showed the lightning hitting just above the center of the field. Electrical current dispersed across the wet ground. Raharja, positioned near midfield, took the full impact. His body convulsed instantly and fell backward. For a moment, other players didn't realize what had happened, assuming he had slipped on the increasingly wet surface. Then someone shouted for help. Players from both teams rushed to his motionless form. Raharja lay perfectly still, his jersey smoking slightly from the intense heat. Medical staff reached him within seconds. His pulse was weak and erratic. Burns marked his chest and left shoulder where the current had entered his body. The rain intensified as paramedics performed CPR on the muddy field. An ambulance arrived 7 minutes later. Raharja was rushed to Banyumas Regional Hospital as teammates and spectators watched in stunned silence. Inside the emergency room, doctors found severe internal damage. The electrical current had caused severe disruption to his cardiac rhythm. Despite aggressive resuscitation efforts, including repeated defibrillation and emergency medications, Raharja's heart could not be stabilized. The electrical burn pathway had created irreversible damage to his cardiac tissue. At 5:42 p.m., just 85 minutes after being struck, Raharja was pronounced dead. Meteorologists later confirmed the bolt had delivered approximately 300 million volts of electricity through his body, far more than any human could survive. The platform dive gone wrong. On July 29, 1983, the Commonwealth Pool in Edmonton, Canada was filled with spectators attending the World University Games. Chalibashvili, a 21-year-old Soviet diver, was considered one of the most promising talents in the sport. His specialty was the 10-meter platform, where he regularly executed dives of the highest difficulty with seemingly effortless precision. For his fourth dive of the competition, Chalibashvili prepared to attempt a reverse 3.5 somersault in the tuck position, one of the most challenging dives in the sport. He stood at the edge of the platform, concentrating intensely. The crowd fell silent as he began his approach. His takeoff from the platform appeared normal. He gained appropriate height and initiated his rotation. But something went wrong in midair. Chalibashvili's body opened up slightly too early from the tight tuck position. This critical error threw off his rotation speed. As he descended toward the water, it became clear he wouldn't complete the required rotations. Instead of entering the water vertically, Chalibashvili struck the back of his head directly on the concrete platform. The sound of the impact echoed through the suddenly silent arena. His body fell limply into the pool. Blood immediately clouded the water around him. Fellow divers jumped in to assist as medical personnel rushed to the scene. Chalibashvili was unconscious when they pulled him from the water. A deep gash exposed his skull where it had struck the unyielding concrete. Paramedics stabilized his neck and applied pressure to the wound. His vital signs were weak, present as they loaded him into an ambulance. Doctors at the University of Alberta Hospital found that the impact had caused severe trauma to his brainstem and cerebellum. Chalibashvili was placed on life support in the intensive care unit. For 9 days, he remained in a deep coma, showing no signs of neurological activity. Despite aggressive medical intervention, the damage was irreversible. His brain had been critically injured at the moment of impact. On August 7, 1983, Sergei Chalibashvili's heart stopped beating. He died without ever regaining consciousness. His promising career and young life ended by a split-second miscalculation. Collision with the machine. On February 22, 1992, the crisp mountain air of Les Arcs, France, was filled with anticipation as athletes prepared for the speed skiing competition at the Albertville Winter Olympics. Bochetai, a 27-year-old Swiss competitor, was among the favorites in this demonstration sport, where skiers regularly exceeded 125 miles per hour down specially prepared slopes. The morning was perfect for training. Clear visibility, firm snow conditions, minimal wind. Bochetai and several teammates decided to take a warm-up run before the day's official practice. They set out on a marked trail adjacent to the competition course, building speed gradually as they descended. Bochetai accelerated into a gentle depression in the slope, his body in the aerodynamic tuck position that speed skiers use to minimize wind resistance. His specialized suit and helmet were designed for maximum velocity. At approximately 68 miles per hour, he approached a small rise in the terrain. As he crested the hill, Bochetai had no time to react. Snowcat, a large machine used for grooming ski slopes, was parked directly in his path. The machine had been maintaining a service road that intersected with the training run. No warning signs or barriers had been placed to alert skiers. The impact was devastating. Bochetai's body struck the metal vehicle with tremendous force. His momentum carried him into the machine's steel frame and treads. The sound of the collision alerted nearby skiers and course workers, who rushed to the scene. Medical personnel arrived within minutes, but there was nothing they could do. The trauma to Bochetai's head, chest, and internal organs was immediate and fatal. The impact had caused massive internal hemorrhaging and multiple compound fractures. He died instantly upon collision. Spectators and fellow competitors gathered at the scene, many in tears as news of the accident spread. Olympic officials quickly announced the postponement of all speed skiing events. Flags at the Olympic venues were lowered to half-mast. An investigation later revealed critical failures in communication between course officials and maintenance crews. The Snowcat operator had no radio contact with event coordinators and was unaware athletes would be using the training run that morning. Spectacle silenced. On March 15, 1971, a modest crowd gathered in the small Belgian town of Retail to watch a local cycling race. Montserrat, the reigning world champion, stood out immediately in his distinctive rainbow jersey, the coveted garment awarded only to world champions. At just 22 years old, he was already considered one of cycling's brightest stars. The race was a minor event on the Belgian calendar, nothing like the major classics or grand tours where Montserrat normally competed. For him, it was a chance to build form early in the season while racing close to home. The 10-kilometer circuit wound through narrow country roads lined with spectators enjoying the first hints of spring. Montserrat quickly established himself at the front of the race. His powerful pedal stroke and professional positioning in the peloton made him easy to spot, even without the distinctive jersey. As he approached the 4th kilometer of the course, he was riding confidently near the front of a small breakaway group. The road ahead appeared clear. Race marshals had blocked most intersections, but not all local residents had been properly notified about road closures. A small British-made car suddenly appeared on the course, driven by an elderly man who was unaware of the ongoing race. The vehicle moved directly into the path of the oncoming cyclists. Other riders swerved frantically. Montserrat, positioned on the outside of the group, had nowhere to go. His bicycle struck the car's front bumper at approximately 30 miles per hour. The impact launched him over the handlebars. Montserrat's body hit the windshield before being thrown onto the asphalt. His helmet, basic leather protection by modern standards, provided minimal protection. Spectators screamed as they witnessed the world champion lying motionless on the pavement. Blood pooled beneath his head. Medical assistance arrived within minutes. A doctor from the crowd immediately began resuscitation efforts as race officials radioed for an ambulance. Despite their desperate attempts, Montserrat's injuries were too severe. The impact had caused severe trauma to his skull and cervical spine. At 4:15 p.m., less than 30 minutes after the collision, Jean-Pierre Montserrat was pronounced dead at the scene. The rainbow jersey, cycling's most prestigious symbol, was stained with the blood of its youngest champion. Olympic heat miscalculation. On July 14, 1912, spectators gathered along the marathon route at the Stockholm Olympics. Lázaro, a 21-year-old Portuguese runner, was among the 68 competitors prepared to tackle the 26.2-mile course. The weather conditions were unusually brutal for Sweden. Temperatures reached 89 degrees Fahrenheit with high humidity and no cloud cover. Before the race, Lázaro made a critical decision based on faulty medical understanding of the time. He covered large portions of his body with a thick layer of suet, animal fat typically used for cooking. This was common practice among some athletes who believed it would prevent sunburn and reduce water loss through the skin. At 1:45 p.m., the marathon began. Lázaro started conservatively, settling into a steady rhythm as the pack made its way through Stockholm's streets. Spectators noted his determined expression as he passed the early checkpoints. For the first 10 kilometers, he appeared strong and composed. As the race progressed, the temperature continued to climb. By the 25-kilometer mark, many runners were showing visible signs of heat distress. Lázaro began to struggle. His pace slowed. Witnesses reported seeing him stagger slightly, his gait becoming irregular. The suet coating, rather than protecting him, was preventing his body from cooling through natural perspiration. At the 30-kilometer mark, near the town of Sollentuna, Lázaro suddenly veered to the side of the road. His legs buckled beneath him. He collapsed onto the dusty surface, unconscious. Race officials and medical personnel rushed to his aid. His skin was alarmingly hot to the touch, yet completely dry. Doctors at the scene recognized the symptoms of severe hyperthermia. Lázaro's core temperature had risen to dangerous levels. His pulse was rapid but weak. Despite having water poured over him and being transported quickly to a nearby medical facility, his condition deteriorated rapidly. For several hours, medical staff fought to lower his temperature and restore fluid balance. His organs began shutting down one by one as the accumulated heat damage spread throughout his system. His heart, already strained from the race, could not sustain the additional stress. At 7:30 a.m. the following day, Francisco Lázaro died without regaining consciousness. He became the first athlete to die during competition in the modern Olympic Games. The autopsy revealed extreme dehydration and electrolyte imbalances that led to multiple organ failure. Skier torn apart. On January 18, 1991, Austrian skier Gernot Reinstadler began a training run on the Lauberhorn course in Wengen, Switzerland. The 20-year-old was preparing for one of the most dangerous downhill races in alpine skiing. The course was known for its extreme speeds and unforgiving terrain. That morning, conditions were fast. The snow was packed hard and visibility was clear. Reinstadler pushed off and accelerated down the mountain. He navigated the steep sections with precision, his skis carving through turns at high speed. As he approached the final obstacle, a series of jumps known as the S section, he was traveling even faster. The jumps required perfect balance and control. Any mistake at that speed could be disastrous. Just before the safety nets, Reinstadler lost control. Observers reported his weight appeared too far forward as he jumped too long into the turn. He crashed into the mesh barrier at full speed. One of his ski tips snagged in the netting. The ski became an anchor. His body continued forward, but the ski held firm. The force caused catastrophic pelvic and leg injuries. His right leg was almost completely torn off. Major blood vessels were severed instantly. A long trail of bright red blood streaked across the white snow behind him. Medical personnel rushed to the scene as he lay semi-conscious on the snow. The internal injuries were severe. Blood continued to pool beneath him as they worked frantically to stabilize his condition. He was transported by helicopter to a hospital in Interlaken, but the massive blood loss had already taken its toll. Doctors performed emergency surgery and administered multiple blood transfusions throughout the evening. The vascular damage was too extensive. Early the next morning, on January 19, 1991, Gernot Reinstadler was gone. He was 20 years old. Dead jockey wins race. On June 4, 1923, Belmont Park Racetrack in New York hosted a steeplechase event that would enter history for the most unusual reason imaginable. Among the riders was Frank Hayes, a 22-year-old stableman who worked at the track. Hayes had spent years caring for horses but had minimal experience as a jockey. He had ridden in one prior race at Havre de Grace without success, making this only his second professional race. He was assigned to ride a horse named Sweet Kiss, a long shot with 20-1 odds. Few people expected the pair to finish anywhere near the front. Hayes had been forced to undergo extreme weight loss to meet racing requirements, dropping from 142 pounds to 130 pounds in the days before the race. In the final 24 hours, he lost nearly 10 pounds through intense exercise, denying himself water and food. The race began and Hayes guided Sweet Kiss over the jumps and around the course. The horse ran steadily, keeping pace with more experienced competitors. Toward the end of the race, Hayes suffered a massive heart attack. His body went limp. He slumped forward over the horse's neck. Observers later reported seeing him weakly tugging at the bridle as he struggled. Some spectators thought he was whispering to the horse. Somehow, his lifeless body did not fall from the saddle. Sweet Kiss continued running. The horse navigated the remaining jumps and turns with Hayes draped across his neck. Sweet Kiss pushed forward and crossed the finish line in first place, winning by a head. The horse cantered an additional 100 yards past the finish line before coming to a stop. Hayes slipped slowly over his mount's side, fell face downward, and lay still. The owner approached. Track physician Dr. John A. Voorhees rushed to the scene and examined Hayes. He had no pulse. He was already gone. Frank Hayes had won his first and only race as a jockey while dead. The extreme weight loss and excitement of the race likely contributed to the fatal heart attack. His body had simply stayed in position through momentum and the way he had fallen forward. Sweet Kiss never raced again after that day. Hayes remains the only jockey in history to win a race after dying. Lion dies on field. On October 24, 1971, the Detroit Lions faced the Chicago Bears in front of 54,418 fans. Chuck Hughes was a wide receiver for the Lions, a 28-year-old player who had spent most of the game on the sideline. Late in the fourth quarter, he was sent onto the field as an injury replacement for Larry Walton. Hughes made a 32-yard catch from quarterback Greg Landry for a first down at the Bears' 37-yard line. It was his first catch of the season. 3 plays later, Landry threw a pass intended for tight end Charlie Sanders near the end zone, but the ball slipped through Sanders' fingers. Hughes had run his route as a decoy on this play. He began jogging back toward the huddle. Suddenly, he grabbed his chest. He dropped face first onto the turf at the 25-yard line. His body hit the ground hard. He did not try to break his fall. At first, some observers thought he might be faking an injury to stop the clock. It was a common tactic in football. Then Dick Butkus, a linebacker for the opposing Bears, saw Hughes begin to convulse. Butkus immediately waved his arms frantically, signaling for the medical staff. The urgency in his gestures made everyone realize this was not a trick. Team doctors sprinted onto the field. Lions team physicians Richard Thompson and Edwin Guise, trainer Kent Falb, assistant trainer Gary Tuthill, along with physicians from both teams and a doctor attending the game rushed to Hughes. They began performing CPR right there on the grass as the crowd progressively became eerily silent. Hughes's chest was compressed repeatedly. Medical personnel worked over him for several minutes trying to restart his heart. Hughes had suffered from advanced arteriosclerosis. His coronary arteries were 75% blocked. A blood clot had dislodged and became trapped in the large artery leading to his heart, cutting off blood flow. The damage was already done. Hughes was placed on a stretcher and wheeled off the field while resuscitation efforts continued. The game resumed and was completed shortly after. His teammates were informed of his death before leaving the stadium. Fans left the stadium unsure of what had happened. At 4:41 p.m., Chuck Hughes was pronounced dead at the hospital. He remains the only player in National Football League history to die during a game. The silent crowd, the frantic CPR, and the confusion on the field became a moment no one present would ever forget. Helmetless impact kills star. On January 13, 1968, the Minnesota North Stars faced the Oakland Seals at the Met Center in Bloomington. Bill Masterton was a 29-year-old center for the North Stars, playing in his first National Hockey League season. That night, helmets were optional in the National Hockey League. Most players, including Masterton, chose not to wear one. Late in the first period, Masterton carried the puck at full speed toward the Oakland goal. As he slid a pass to his wing, one of the Seals' defenders' sticks tangled with Masterton's skates, causing him to lose his balance and pitch forward. He didn't see the other defender, who caught him with a clean check that knocked him backward. The check was legal. There was no penalty. But Masterton fell backward with no way to protect himself. His unhelmeted head struck the ice with tremendous force. Teammate Andre Boudreas would later recall the sound as resembling a baseball bat hitting a ball. Referee Wally Harris compared the hit to an explosion. Blood immediately began pouring from his nose and ears, clear signs of severe brain trauma. The impact of the hit caused him to lose consciousness before he even hit the ice. According to some accounts, he briefly came to and muttered, never again," before passing back out. Medical staff rushed onto the surface as Masterton lay motionless in a growing pool of blood. He did not respond to any stimulus. He received treatment on the ice and in the dressing room before being rushed to Fairview Southdale Hospital in nearby Edina, Minnesota. Doctors discovered massive swelling in his brain. The injury was too severe for the medical technology available at the time. Surgery was not a viable option. Masterton never regained consciousness. His parents, who had flown in from Winnipeg, his brother, his wife Carol, and his 2 children remained at his bedside as the swelling continued to worsen. Some 30 hours after his fall, his family made the decision to remove him from life support. The pressure inside his skull could not be relieved. His brain had sustained irreversible damage from the single impact with the ice. On January 15, 1968, Bill Masterton was pronounced dead. He remains the only player in National Hockey League history to die from injuries sustained during a game. His death sparked an immediate debate about helmet requirements, though the rule would not be implemented until the 1979-80 season, 11 years later. The sound of his head hitting the ice stayed with everyone who heard it. Concrete block skull crash. Fabio Casartelli died on July 18, 1995, in the Pyrenees Mountains of France. He was a 24-year-old professional cyclist competing in the Tour de France, one of the most demanding races in the world. Casartelli had won an Olympic gold medal in Barcelona in 1992 and was considered one of Italy's most promising riders. On that afternoon, he was descending the Col de Porte d'Aspet during the 15th stage of the race. The descent was steep and technical, with sharp switchback turns that required perfect control at high speed. Casartelli was traveling at nearly 55 miles per hour when he approached a particularly dangerous curve. Several riders crashed on this technically challenging descent. In a split second, Casartelli lost control. He fell and was thrown off the road. Along the roadside were concrete blocks. Casartelli's head struck the concrete blocks with tremendous force. He was not wearing a helmet. At the time, helmets were not mandatory in professional cycling, and many riders chose not to wear them because of weight and heat concerns. The impact was immediate and devastating. His skull fractured on contact with the concrete. Casartelli suffered severe head injuries and lost consciousness. Medical staff arrived within 10 seconds. While being flown to a local hospital in Tarbes by helicopter, Casartelli stopped breathing. After numerous resuscitation attempts and suffering 4 cardiac arrests, he was declared dead. Fabio Casartelli died without ever regaining consciousness. The back of his head and neck slamming into a concrete barrier with sharp edges had destroyed critical areas of his brain on impact. Whether a helmet would have saved his life became a subject of debate. The Tour's senior doctor, Gerard Porte, claimed that the fatal blow was to an area of Casartelli's head that would not have been covered by a helmet. However, Michel Disteldorf, the French doctor who examined Casartelli's body on behalf of the coroner, told the Sunday Times that the point of impact was on the top of the skull, an area that would have been protected by a helmet. Out of respect for Casartelli, the 16th stage was raced non-competitively the following day. The Motorola team led the peloton across the finish in a slow procession. 3 days later, Casartelli's teammate Lance Armstrong won a stage and dedicated the victory to him by pointing at the sky as he crossed the finish line. His death sparked renewed debate about the consequences of high-speed crashes without proper head protection. Smile then sudden death. On January 25, 2004, Portuguese club Benfica faced Vitória de Guimarães in a league match at Estádio de Afonso Henriques. The game was being broadcast live on television. Miklos Fejér was a 24-year-old Hungarian striker playing for Benfica. He had been performing well that season and was considered a promising young talent. Benfica were leading 1-0. Fejér had come on as a substitute and assisted Fernando Aguiar, another substitute, for the match's only goal. In injury time, during a throw-in for Guimarães, Feher got in the way to waste time and prevent the opponent from taking the throw. The referee spotted him wasting time and issued him a yellow card. Feher responded with a smile and ran his hand through his hair, seemingly unbothered by the decision. The crowd barely noticed. Seconds later, his expression changed. He bent forward, seemingly in discomfort. Then he collapsed backward onto the grass. His body hit the ground hard. Players from both teams immediately recognized something was terribly wrong. They rushed toward him, waving frantically for medical assistance. Team doctors sprinted onto the field with emergency equipment. They worked desperately to restart Feher's heart, performing chest compressions and cardiopulmonary resuscitation. Reports indicated that emergency medical personnel managed to revive Feher on the field using a defibrillator, though his heart stopped again. Players from both Benfica and Guimarães stood nearby. Some Benfica players knelt to pray while others were crying. The match was abandoned. However, in the stands, many spectators did not immediately understand what was happening. Benfica supporters continued to chant, and Vitória followers whistled, believing it was just another time-wasting maneuver. There were reports of delays in the ambulance's arrival, and there was no medical equipment immediately at hand when Feher first collapsed. Feher was rushed to the hospital in an ambulance. However, his heart had stopped by the time he reached the hospital. Doctors fought to stabilize him, but his heart would not respond. He had suffered cardiac arrest caused by cardiac arrhythmia brought on by hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, a disease of the heart muscle that often goes undetected in young athletes. At approximately 11:10 p.m., about 1 hour and 40 minutes after collapsing, Miklos Feher was pronounced dead. He was 24 years old. The image of him smiling just seconds before collapsing became one of the most haunting moments in soccer history. The contrast between that smile and what followed immediately after left an indelible mark on everyone who witnessed it. Rage on Dirt Track. On August 9, 2014, Canandaigua Motorsports Park in upstate New York hosted a sprint car race. Among the drivers was 20-year-old Kevin Ward Jr., who had been racing since age 4, starting with go-karts. He was in his 5th season with the Empire Super Sprint Series. Also racing that night was Tony Stewart, a 3-time NASCAR champion and one of the most recognizable names in American motorsports. During the race, there was contact between Ward's car and Stewart's vehicle on a turn. Ward lost control and spun into the wall. His car came to rest on the edge of the track. The caution flag came out, and cars slowed to a crawl, circling the track under caution as is standard procedure after a crash. Ward climbed out of his car. Instead of staying with his vehicle or moving to a safe area, Ward made a decision. He stepped onto the racing surface and began walking directly into the path of oncoming cars. He was dressed in a black racing suit and black helmet on a poorly lit dirt track at night. Sprint cars have poor visibility, making it difficult for drivers to see clearly. His intention was clear. He wanted to confront Stewart. He walked further into the lane, waving his arms and gesturing furiously as cars swerved around him. Stewart's car approached. Ward stepped even closer, pointing and shouting. Stewart's right rear tire struck Ward. Ward was sent sliding down the track. The race was immediately red flagged. Medical personnel rushed to where Ward lay on the dirt. Ward died of massive blunt trauma before paramedics could get him to a hospital. At 11:15 p.m., approximately 45 minutes after the incident, Kevin Ward Jr. was pronounced dead at the hospital. He was 24 years old. The incident sparked intense debate over whether Stewart had intentionally hit Ward or if the incident was an accident caused by poor visibility, Ward's dark clothing on a poorly lit track, and the handling characteristics of sprint cars, which use throttle as much as steering to maneuver. A grand jury investigation was conducted. Stewart was not charged criminally, with the Ontario County District Attorney stating that the grand jury found no evidence to charge Stewart with any crimes. A wrongful death lawsuit was filed by Ward's family in 2015, claiming Stewart acted with reckless and malicious intent. The lawsuit was later settled, though details remained confidential. The incident raised questions about safety protocols and driver behavior on racetracks. Collapsed mid-performance. On April 17, 1987, comedian and actor Dick Shawn was performing a one-man show at Mandeville Auditorium on the campus of the University of California, San Diego. He was 63 years old. He had been working in American comedy and film for decades. Shawn had built a reputation as one of the most unpredictable performers in the business. His style resisted easy categorization. He was absurdist when absurdism was not yet a comfortable label. He was physical, strange, and deliberately difficult to read. Audiences who came to see Dick Shawn came prepared for anything. That was the contract he had established over a career spanning television appearances, film roles, and live performance. He was perhaps best known to mainstream audiences for his role in The Producers, the 1967 Mel Brooks film, where he played a hippie actor cast as Adolf Hitler in a deliberately terrible Broadway show. The role suited him. He was the kind of performer who made discomfort funny. The University of California, San Diego was a fitting venue for that kind of comedy. The audience that night was primed for the unexpected. They had come to see Dick Shawn, which meant they had come to see something they could not anticipate. The show had been proceeding. Shawn was mid-performance, working through his set in the way he always had, with unpredictability built into every movement and every pause. The audience was engaged. They were watching a man who had made a career out of defying their expectations, and so far that evening, he had delivered exactly what they had paid for. He had been on stage roughly 20 minutes, in the middle of a routine in which he was portraying a politician imagining the world after a nuclear catastrophe. The character had just declared that if everyone outside the room were dead, he would be their leader. Then he collapsed. He fell face forward onto the stage. It happened during the performance, in the middle of his act, in front of the roughly 500 people in that auditorium. The audience laughed. This is the detail that makes the story what it is. They laughed because Dick Shawn falling face forward onto a stage was, in the context of a Dick Shawn performance, entirely plausible as a bit. It looked like comedy. It was staged at a moment when anything could be stageable. The applause followed the laughter. The crowd responded to what they believed was a deliberate physical gag from a performer known for deliberate physical gags. He did not get up. The laughter continued for a period of time. Several minutes passed. The audience held with the bit, waiting for the punchline, waiting for him to spring back up, waiting for whatever was coming next. Nothing came next. At some point, the recognition shifted. Someone in the auditorium understood that what they were looking at was not comedy. The performance had stopped being a performance. The man on the stage was not performing. A stagehand came out, examined him, and called into the audience asking for a doctor. Emergency assistance was called. Responders arrived at the venue. By the time the situation had been recognized as a medical emergency, significant time had elapsed from the moment Shawn hit the stage. The delay was not born of indifference. It was born of the context he himself had spent a career constructing. An audience that expected the unexpected had no reliable framework for recognizing when the unexpected had become real. Resuscitation was attempted. Shawn was transported to Scripps Memorial Hospital. The efforts made to revive him could not succeed. Dick Shawn was pronounced dead at Scripps Memorial Hospital on April 17, 1987. He was 63 years old. Cause of death, heart attack. Ring rope drop. On May 23, 1999, professional wrestler and performer Owen Hart was scheduled to descend from the rafters of Kemper Arena in Kansas City, Missouri, as part of his entrance for the World Wrestling Federation's Over the Edge pay-per-view event. He was 34 years old. The arena was full, with a broader audience watching live on pay-per-view at home. Owen Hart had been a professional wrestler for over a decade. He came from one of the most recognized families in the history of the sport, the Hart family of Calgary, Alberta. His father, Stu Hart, had trained wrestlers for generations out of the Hart family home. Owen had grown up in that world. He had trained rigorously and had developed into one of the most technically skilled performers in the WWF roster. He was known for his in-ring ability, for his precise and controlled style, and for a comedic character persona that had made him genuinely popular with audiences. By 1999, he had held multiple titles and had been a fixture of WWF programming for years. The character he was performing as that night was the Blue Blazer, a costumed superhero persona that Hart had used at various points in his career. The entrance planned for that evening involved Hart being lowered from the rafters of Kemper Arena on a cable and harness system, descending dramatically toward the ring as part of the theatrical presentation of the character. The character was being played as a bumbling, parodic superhero, and the descent was intended to end with Hart releasing himself from the harness a few feet above the ring and tumbling clumsily forward for comic effect. The mechanism that was supposed to make this possible was a quick-release clip on the harness. A harness and cable rigging system had been set up in the arena's rafters for the descent. Hart was fitted into the harness backstage before the sequence began. The arena was loud, lit, and full. 16,000 people were watching the ring and the space above it. The quick-release mechanism on the harness disengaged prematurely. Hart fell approximately 78 feet. He struck the top rope of the wrestling ring chest first during the fall, approximately a foot from the nearest turnbuckle. The impact was witnessed by the live audience in Kemper Arena. Pay-per-view viewers at home, however, did not see the fall itself. A pre-taped vignette featuring Hart's character was airing on the broadcast at the moment he came down. There was no ambiguity inside the arena about what had happened. The fall was visible to the entire crowd. Medical personnel were stationed on site, as they were at every WWF live event. They reached Hart in the ring immediately after he came down. Assessment began at once. The injuries sustained in a fall of 78 feet onto the top rope of a wrestling ring were severe and immediate. Hart was removed from the ring and transported from the arena. emergency medical care continued during transport. He was taken to Truman Medical Center in Kansas City. The over-the-edge event continued after Hart was taken from the arena. This decision, made by WWF Chairman Vince McMahon during the broadcast, became a subject of significant public and legal scrutiny in the months and years that followed. At Truman Medical Center, efforts to treat Hart's injuries were unsuccessful. He died that evening. Owen Hart was pronounced dead at Truman Medical Center. He was 34 years old. Cause of death: blunt force chest trauma resulting in a severed aorta, internal hemorrhaging, and cardiac arrest. Subsequent litigation brought by the Hart family alleged that the harness and rigging system, sourced from a different supplier than the system used for similar descents and other promotions, was defective and inadequate for the load it was asked to bear. The case was settled in November of 2000 for $18 million. Dagger scene fatal. On March 31, 1993, actor Brandon Lee was on set at Carolco Studios in Wilmington, North Carolina, filming a scene for the feature film The Crow. He was 28 years old. The production was 8 days from completion of principal photography. Lee was the son of martial arts legend and actor Bruce Lee, and he had been building a film career of his own through the late 1980s and early 1990s. The Crow was the most significant project he had taken on. He was playing the lead role, a murdered musician who returns from the dead to seek justice. Production had been underway in Wilmington since February, and Lee had been working consistently through the shoot. The scene being filmed in the early hours of March 31st was one in which his character was shot and killed. A Smith & Wesson Model 6 S2944 Magnum revolver was in use on set as a prop firearm for the production. Prop firearms are a standard element of film production, and the Crow production had been using this weapon in various configurations throughout filming. Prior to the scene that night, the .44 Magnum had been used during close-up photography with dummy rounds, which are inert cartridges loaded into a weapon so that the cylinder appears full on camera. The dummy rounds used on this production had been improvised on set, live cartridges with the powder removed, but, critically, with the primers left intact. When one of those dummy rounds was discharged during a previous filming session, its primer ignited by the firing pin even without powder behind it. The bullet was generated enough force to separate from the casing and lodge inside the barrel of the weapon. This was not detected when the gun was collected and prepared for subsequent use with blank cartridges for the shooting scene. When the scene was filmed and the blank cartridge was discharged, the lodged bullet was still inside the barrel. The gas pressure released by the blank's powder load propelled it forward with lethal velocity, comparable to that of a live round. It struck Lee in the abdomen at a distance of approximately 12 to 15 feet, fired by his co-star Michael Massey. He was standing on the set, in the middle of a filmed scene, with cast and crew present around him. He fell backward instead of forward, as the choreography of the scene had called for. When the director called, Cut and Lee did not get up. The crew initially believed he was either still acting or that he had been disoriented by an impact with the set. There was no visible bleeding. By the time the crew realized he had been shot, valuable seconds had been lost. Emergency services were called. Lee was transported from the studio to New Hanover Regional Medical Center in Wilmington. At New Hanover Regional Medical Center, surgeons operated on Lee for approximately 6 hours. The injury was severe. The bullet had passed through several vital organs and lodged in his spine. The surgical team worked through the morning. They could not stop what the wound had set in motion. Brandon Lee was pronounced dead at New Hanover Regional Medical Center at approximately 1 in the afternoon on March 31st, 1993, roughly 13 hours after the discharge that wounded him. He was 28 years old. Cause of death: massive internal hemorrhaging from the abdominal gunshot wound sustained on set. A subsequent investigation by the New Hanover County District Attorney concluded that the death was accidental, the result of negligence in the handling and inspection of the prop weapon. No criminal charges were filed. Curtain call collapse. On November 30th, 1958, actor Gareth Jones was performing in a live television drama broadcast on the ITV network in the United Kingdom. The production was in the episode of the anthology series Armchair Theatre, made by ABC Television, titled Underground. Jones was 33 years old. He was working in British television at a time when television drama was broadcast live, without delay, without the ability to stop and start over. Live television drama in 1958 operated under conditions that have no modern equivalent in scripted programming. There was no tape. There was no recorded safety net. Whatever happened in the studio went out over the airwaves in real time. Directors managed the broadcast from a control room, making decisions in the moment. Actors moved between sets within the studio, hitting marks, delivering lines, and transitioning between scenes on a schedule that allowed for no deviation. The technical crew, the camera operators, the sound engineers, all of them were working in continuous motion from the moment the broadcast began until the moment it ended. ABC Television, transmitting under contract to ITV, was one of the major commercial broadcasters operating in Britain at the time. Underground, a play adapted by James Forsyth from Harold Reen's novel about a group of survivors trapped in the London Underground after a nuclear strike, was being broadcast that evening from ABC's studios in Didsbury, Manchester. The production was directed by Ted Kotcheff and produced by Sidney Newman. Jones was a working actor playing the role of Carl Norman, a businessman. There was a particular irony embedded in the role he was playing that night. Jones's character, in the script, was supposed to die of a heart attack during the course of the play. Between scenes, in the second act, Jones collapsed. The most cited account places him in the makeup area where a makeup artist was rapidly applying simulated dirt to his face for his next scene. He told her he felt sick. Then he fell forward onto her tray. Other accounts placed the collapse in the wings, with cast member Peter Bowles recalling later that he saw Jones approaching the set on camera and then watched him go down. Either way, the broadcast was live, and it did not stop. The director, Ted Kotcheff, managing the production from the control room, had to respond in real time. Producer Sidney Newman, watching from a nearby office, ran into the control room and famously instructed Kotcheff to shoot it like a football match, to follow the actors and let the play improvise around the missing character. The remaining cast members had to respond in real time as well. There was no mechanism for pausing the broadcast, no way to cut to a previously recorded segment, no option to tell the viewing audience at home that something had happened and the show would resume later. The cast improvised. Jones's lines were redistributed, adjustments were made during a brief commercial break, and the play was carried to its conclusion. The audience at home, an estimated 8 to 12 million viewers, did not know that anything had gone wrong. The other actors were not told that Jones had died until after the broadcast ended. Efforts were made to assist Jones backstage by a doctor who had been stationed at the studio in case of accidents involving the rubble strewn across the set. He could not be revived. Gareth Jones died during the live broadcast of Underground on November 30th, 1958. He was 33 years old. Cause of death, heart attack. The same cause his character was scripted to die from, in the same broadcast he never finished. Audience watched helpless. On April 15, 1984, comedian and actor Tommy Cooper was performing live at Her Majesty's Theatre in London as part of a televised variety program called Live from Her Majesty's, broadcast on the ITV network and produced by London Weekend Television. He was 63 years old. The theatre was full, and an estimated 12 million additional viewers were watching the broadcast at home. Tommy Cooper had been a fixture of British entertainment for decades. He was a large man, physically distinctive, instantly recognizable from the fez he wore on stage. His act was built around magic tricks, and the magic tricks were built around failure. He performed illusions that went wrong in elaborate, impossible ways. He stumbled and bumbled and reacted with exaggerated confusion to his own failures. The audience laughed because the failure was the point. He had refined this approach over a long career in clubs, theaters, and television, and he had become one of the most beloved comedic performers in Britain. By 1984, Cooper had been performing for well over 30 years. He was a familiar presence on British television. He had done specials, series, and countless live appearances. Her Majesty's Theatre was a prestigious West End venue, and a live television broadcast from its stage was a significant event. The audience in the theatre that evening had come to see one of the country's most celebrated entertainers. The cameras were there for the same reason. The variety show was underway. Cooper was performing his act, the familiar combination of attempted illusions and deliberate comedic incompetence that his audiences had come to love. An assistant had helped him put on a cloak for a bit in which the host, Jimmy Tarbuck, hidden behind the curtain, was to pass him props that he would seem to pull from inside the gown. Cooper said, "Thank you, love," to the assistant. The theater was responding. The crowd was with him. Then he slumped. He did not fall immediately. He slumped first, visibly losing control of his posture, leaning back against the curtain, and then he went down. The audience laughed. This was Tommy Cooper. Tommy Cooper slumped and stumbled and fell as a matter of professional practice. The crowd had seen him do versions of this hundreds of times. The laughter made sense given everything they knew about him. For a period of time, the audience maintained this interpretation. He was on the floor. The laughter continued. The situation did not resolve itself into the next bit. He did not get up. Stage crew moved to assist. The curtain was closed in front of Cooper while production cut to an early commercial break. Behind the curtain, paramedics were attempting resuscitation. In front of the curtain, the show resumed. The comedy duo Les Dennis and Dustin G were sent out to perform their routine while the work to revive Cooper continued a few feet behind them. They could hear the chest compressions as they tried to get laughs. Cooper was taken backstage and then by ambulance to Westminster Hospital. Tommy Cooper was pronounced dead at Westminster Hospital on April 15, 1984. He was 63 years old. Cause of death, heart attack. Blade missed mark. On April 26, 1976, actor Sid James collapsed on stage during the opening night of a touring stage production of the farce The Mating Season at the Sunderland Empire Theatre in Sunderland, England. He was 62 years old. Approximately 350 people were in the audience that evening. Sid James had spent decades building one of the most recognizable careers in British entertainment. He was South African born, had come to Britain after the Second World War, and had worked consistently through film and television from the 1950s onward. He was known to an enormous segment of the British public through the Carry On film series, a long-running franchise of broad comedy films in which James appeared in 19 separate entries through the 1960s and 70s. His face, his voice, and his particular style of delivery had become familiar to multiple generations of British audiences. He was also the star of the long-running television sitcom Bless This House. By 1976, he was 62 years old and still working steadily in live theater, despite having survived a serious heart attack 9 years earlier. The Mating Season, written by Irish playwright Sam Cree, was a touring stage production. James was its lead performer. The production had been touring, and the stop at the Sunderland Empire Theatre on April 26 was the opening night of that run at this venue. The Sunderland Empire was a substantial theatre with a long history in the northeast of England. The crowd that came on April 26th had come to see Sid James, a performer they recognized and had come to expect a specific kind of entertainment from. Fellow cast member Olga Lowe, an old friend from James's early days in South African theatre, was on stage with him during the performance that evening. The two were working through a scene seated together on a sofa, perhaps 15 to 20 minutes into the play. Lowe delivered her line. James answered as scripted. She delivered her next line. He did not respond. His head had slumped and his eyes had rolled back. Lowe initially thought it was a gag. Sid James was a known prankster on stage. An unresponsive moment from him, played for absurdity, would have been entirely in character. She tried to ad-lib. The audience laughed. What they were watching looked like comic material to them as well. After a few moments of trying to get a response, Lowe realized the situation was not what it appeared. She called to the wings for the curtain to be brought down. Technical manager Melvin James, no relation to Sid, called for a doctor. The audience, still unaware, laughed when the request came through. Assuming this was also part of the play, the request had to be repeated in earnest. James was removed from the stage. Emergency assistance was sought. He was transported to Sunderland Royal Hospital. At Sunderland Royal Hospital, efforts to treat James were unsuccessful. He was pronounced dead approximately an hour after his collapse. Sid James died at Sunderland Royal Hospital on April 26, 1976. He was 62 years old. Cause of death: heart attack. Stunt wire snap. On October 12, 1984, actor and performer John Eric Hexum was on the set of the CBS television series Cover Up at 20th Century Fox Studios in Los Angeles, California. He was 26 years old. The production was preparing to film an additional scene at the end of a long shooting day for the 7th episode of the season, titled Golden Opportunity. Cover Up was an action-adventure series in its first season on CBS. Hexum was one of its leads, playing Mac Harper, a former Green Beret posing as a male model while serving as an undercover CIA operative. He was young, physically striking, and had been identified as someone with significant potential as a television presence. The series was in production, working through its early episodes, establishing the rhythms of a long television shoot. A .44 Magnum revolver was on set, loaded with blank cartridges for use in filming. Prop firearms loaded with blanks are a standard element of action television production. They are used routinely, handled by cast and crew throughout a shoot, and are present on set in significant numbers across productions of this kind. Hexum had been practicing loading the weapon between takes. The crew had been shooting for hours, and the announcement of yet another scene to film prompted Hexum to make a joke to lighten the mood. Reportedly saying something to the effect of, "Can you believe this crap?" He removed all but one of the blank cartridges from the cylinder, spun it in imitation of Russian roulette, raised the revolver to his right temple, and pulled the trigger. What Hexum appears not to have understood, and what is not widely understood about blank cartridges, is that a blank discharged at point-blank range against the human skull generates concussive force sufficient to cause severe injury. A blank cartridge does not fire a bullet. It does discharge a rapidly expanding column of gas, and, in many cases, wadding material with significant force. Pressed directly against the temple, that force was transmitted through the bone. The discharge fractured his skull and drove a bone fragment, roughly the size of a quarter, into his brain. Hexum collapsed on set. Cast and crew were present when it happened. Emergency services were called immediately. Hexum was transported to Beverly Hills Medical Center, then transferred to a larger facility where he underwent approximately 5 hours of surgery. The injury he had sustained was severe and the damage to his brain was extensive. 6 days later, Hexum was declared brain dead. He was kept on life support while his family arranged for the donation of his organs. John Eric Hexum was taken off life support on October 18, 1984. He was 26 years old. Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the brain, caused by the concussive discharge of the blank cartridge against his skull. His heart, kidneys, corneas, and skin were donated to multiple recipients. Live broadcast fall. On July 8, 1965, stunt pilot Paul Mantz was at the controls of a custom-built aircraft during the filming of the 20th Century Fox feature film, The Flight of the Phoenix, at Pilot Knob Mesa, near Buttercup Valley, on the California-Arizona border. He was 61 years old. The film crew and production personnel were positioned across the valley floor to capture the footage. Paul Mantz had been one of Hollywood's most respected and experienced aerial stunt pilots for decades. He had performed in and coordinated aerial sequences for major Hollywood productions, going back to the 1930s. His work included flying for Amelia Earhart on the planning of her round-the-world attempt and aerial coordination on dozens of major productions. By 1965, he had over 25,000 flight hours and a reputation that was unmatched in his field. The Flight of the Phoenix was a film about a group of survivors who built a makeshift aircraft from the wreckage of a crashed plane. For the production, Tall Mantz Aviation had hired aeronautical engineer Otto Timm to design and build a real flying aircraft to portray this improvised machine on screen. The plane, designated the Tall Mantz Phoenix P-1, had been constructed using parts taken from the other aircraft, primarily a Fairchild C-82 packet, and was an FAA-certified one-off design. Mantz's longtime business partner Frank Tallman had originally been scheduled to fly it, but Tallman had injured his leg in a go-kart accident with his son and could not perform. Mantz took over. On July 7th, Tallman had flown the Phoenix for the first aerial shots before the injury. On July 8th, Mantz was performing a touch-and-go maneuver to simulate a takeoff, with stuntman Bobby Rose strapped in behind him, representing a character played by Hardy Kruger. The first take of the day went successfully. The director called for a second take as a protection shot, to have additional usable footage in case anything was wrong with the first. During that second take, the aircraft broke apart. As Mantz brought the Phoenix down for the low pass, his rate of descent at approximately 90 miles per hour exceeded the structural limits of the aircraft. The landing gear struck the ground, the boom section behind the wings fractured, and the plane nosed over and cartwheeled. The disintegration was witnessed by everyone on location and captured on the rolling cameras. Mantz was killed instantly. Bobby Rose, thrown clear of the cockpit, survived with a broken pelvis and a broken shoulder. Emergency services were called to the remote desert location. Mantz was confirmed dead at the scene. Rose was transported for medical treatment. The accident investigation that followed identified multiple contributing factors, including Mantz's misjudgment of the pullout speed, the nose-heavy configuration of the P-1, the inadequate trim and absence of flaps, and disputed questions about toxicology testing performed on Mantz's remains hours after the crash without refrigeration. The Flight of the Phoenix was completed using a modified North American O-47A as a stand-in and was released later in 1965. The closing credits carry a tribute. It should be remembered that Paul Mantz, a fine man and a brilliant flyer, gave his life in the making of this film. Paul Mantz was pronounced dead at the scene on July 8, 1965. He was 61 years old. Cause of death, injury sustained when the aircraft broke apart during the filming sequence. Canon Act gone. On March 22, 1978, Carl Wallenda was walking a high wire strung between the two towers of the Condado Plaza Hotel in San Juan, Puerto Rico. He was 73 years old. A crowd had gathered below and in the surrounding area to watch. Carl Wallenda was the founder and patriarch of the Flying Wallendas, a family acrobatic troupe that had been performing high wire acts for decades. The Flying Wallendas had built an international reputation through generations of performance. Wallenda himself had been walking wires at extreme heights for most of his life. He had performed in circuses, arenas, and outdoor venues around the world. He had survived accidents and losses that would have ended most careers, including the 1962 pyramid collapse in Detroit that killed 2 members of his troupe and paralyzed his adopted son, and had continued performing into his 70s. The walk between the towers of the Condado Plaza Hotel in San Juan was a publicity event for a circus performance Wallenda was promoting with his granddaughter. The wire had been strung between the 2 hotel towers, approximately 10 stories above the ground, and roughly 37 meters in the air, with the wire spanning the street between the buildings. For Carl Wallenda, who had spent a lifetime at heights that most people would not approach, the setup was within the range of what he had done before. San Juan in March is warm, and the coastal location of the Condado Plaza means exposure to wind coming off the water. The conditions on the wire that day included gusting winds of up to 30 knots. Investigators later determined that the guy wires intended to stabilize the main wire had been improperly secured. The crowd that gathered to watch was below him and in surrounding areas with sightlines to the wire and the space above the street. A film crew from local station WAPA TV was capturing the walk. Wallenda began the walk. He moved out onto the wire between the two towers, high above the street, in front of the crowd that had assembled to watch him. About halfway across, the wind caught him. He fought to recover his balance for approximately 30 seconds, kneeling on the wire, attempting to lower his center of gravity onto it. He fell from the wire. The crowd below watched him fall. The fall from 10 stories above the ground covered a distance that left no uncertainty about what the outcome would be. He struck a parked taxi on the street below. The crowd that had come to see Karl Wallenda walk a wire witnessed his fall. The WAPA TV cameras recorded it. Emergency responders were called. The injuries sustained in a fall of that height were unsurvivable. Wallenda was pronounced dead on arrival at the hospital. Karl Wallenda was 73 years old. Cause of death: injuries sustained in the fall from the high wire above the Condado Plaza Hotel on March 22, 1978, with high winds and an improperly secured wire identified as contributing factors. Helicopter blades down. On July 23, 1982, actor Vic Morrow was on the set of Twilight Zone, the movie at Indian Dunes, a movie ranch in Valencia, California. He was 53 years old. Camera operators, crew members, and production personnel from the John Landis segment of the film were present on the location. Also present on set were two child actors, Micah Dinley, age 7, and Renee Shin-Yi Chen, age 6. Vic Morrow had been working in film and television since the 1950s. He was a character actor with a long career, known for his work in the television series Combat, among other productions. By 1982, he had decades of professional work behind him and was experienced in the demands of film production. Twilight Zone. The movie was an anthology film, with different segments directed by different filmmakers. The segment being filmed that night was directed by John Landis. It was set during the Vietnam War era and required large-scale pyrotechnic effects and a low-flying Bell UH-1 Iroquois helicopter working in coordination with those explosions on the ground. The location at Indian Dunes had been selected for this kind of work. The scene called for Morrow to carry both child actors through a simulated war zone while pyrotechnic explosions detonated around them and the helicopter flew overhead. It was approximately 2:20 in the morning when the sequence was filmed. Under regulations governing the employment of child actors in California, this kind of work at that hour was strictly prohibited. The required permits had not been obtained, and the children were being paid in cash off the books to circumvent state law. A fire safety officer who would normally also have served as the children's welfare worker had been kept unaware of their presence on set. The sequence began. The helicopter, piloted by Vietnam War veteran Dorsey Wingo, was hovering approximately 24 feet above the ground. Special effects explosions were detonated beneath and near the helicopter as it flew low over the set. The metal lid of one of the mortar effects was propelled upward by the explosion and struck the helicopter's tail rotor, causing it to fail and detach. The helicopter spun out of control. It came down into the area where Morrow and the two children were positioned. The right landing skid struck Renee Shin-Yi Chen first. The main rotor blades then struck Vic Morrow and Micah Dinley. All three were killed. The 6 occupants of the helicopter survived, with injuries. Emergency responders were called to the Indian Dunes location. All 3 victims on the ground were confirmed dead at the scene. The production was shut down immediately. The accident triggered investigations by multiple agencies, including the National Transportation Safety Board, which examined the helicopter's loss of control and the proximity of the pyrotechnic effects to the aircraft. Criminal charges of involuntary manslaughter were filed against director John Landis and 4 other individuals associated with the production: associate producer George Folsey Jr., unit production manager Dan Allingham, special effects coordinator Paul Stewart, and helicopter pilot Dorsey Wingo. The trial that followed was lengthy. In 1987, after extensive legal proceedings, Landis and all 4 co-defendants were acquitted of all charges, with the prosecution unable to prove that the accident had been foreseeable. The incident led to significant changes in safety regulations governing film productions in California, including revised child labor laws controlling when and under what conditions child actors could be employed on sets involving hazardous work, and stricter rules governing the use of helicopters in film production. Vic Morrow was pronounced dead at the scene at Indian Dunes on July 23, 1982. He was 53 years old. Micah Dinley, age 7, and Renee Shin-Yi Chen, age 6, were also pronounced dead at the scene. Cause of death for all three: injuries sustained when the helicopter rotor and landing skid struck them during the filming sequence. Electrocuted before live audience. On May 3, 1972, the Top Rank Suite in Swansea, Wales was packed with fans eager to see Stone the Crows perform. Harvey was the band's lead guitarist, known for his blues-influenced style and energetic stage presence. That day, as the venue filled with anticipation, the band prepared for what should have been another memorable show. Before the performance began, Harvey stood alone on stage during the final sound check. The band members waited at the side of the stage while technical issues were being addressed. Harvey approached the microphone to announce the delay to the waiting crowd. "There's a technical hitch," he said to the audience. What he didn't know was that the microphone was ungrounded, a dangerous electrical fault that had gone unnoticed. The moment he touched the metal microphone while holding his guitar, his body became a conductor between the two pieces of equipment. The electrical current found its path through him. Drummer Colin Allen, standing nearby, heard a deep humming sound and saw an arc shape appear between the microphone and guitar. Harvey's body went rigid, frozen in place by the electrical charge. Allen reacted immediately, rushing forward and kicking the guitar out of Harvey's hand to break the connection. Harvey collapsed onto the stage floor. Les Harvey died as a result of the electrocution. The tragic accident occurred due to the improperly grounded microphone, a safety issue that would later lead to stricter electrical standards in live music venues. Les Harvey was 27 years old. His death became a catalyst for improved safety protocols that have since protected countless musicians from similar fates. Guitar legend murdered on stage. On December 8, 2004, the Alrosa Villa nightclub in Columbus, Ohio, was filled with heavy metal fans. Daryl Abbott, known to the world as Dimebag Darrell, was performing with his band Damageplan. The 38-year-old guitarist had built a legendary career in metal music and was beloved by fans across the globe. The venue held around 400 people that night. The band had just begun their opening song when a man in a Columbus Blue Jackets hockey jersey climbed onto the stage. His name was Nathan Gale, a 25-year-old former Marine suffering from severe paranoid delusions. He believed the members of Daryl's previous band had stolen his thoughts and lyrics. Gale pulled a 9mm Beretta handgun from his jacket. Before anyone could react, he aimed directly at Daryl's head and fired. Multiple shots struck him at point-blank range. Daryl collapsed instantly onto the stage, dying before his body hit the floor. But Gale did not stop. He turned the gun on Jeffrey Thompson, Damageplan's head of security, who rushed to intervene. Thompson was shot multiple times and fell. Aaron Halk, an Alrosa Villa employee, tried to stop the gunman. He was shot multiple times and passed away. Nathan Bray, an audience member attempting to perform CPR on the wounded, was shot in the chest and later succumbed to his injuries at the hospital. Gale grabbed a hostage and held the gun to his head. The venue descended into chaos. People trapped inside could not escape. The attack had lasted approximately 3 minutes, but 4 people were already gone. Columbus police officer James Niggemeyer entered through a back door. He moved through the venue and spotted Gale holding his hostage near the stage. Niggemeyer raised his 12-gauge Remington shotgun and fired a single blast. The shot struck Gale in the head, ending the threat immediately. The hostage was released unharmed. Daryl's body remained on stage where he had fallen. The tragedy at Alrosa Villa would forever change concert security and leave the metal community in mourning. Illusionists trapped in fire. On May 9, 1911, the Empire Palace Theatre in Edinburgh, Scotland, was sold out for another performance in Lafayette's 2-week run. Lafayette was one of the most famous illusionists in the world, known for elaborate stage productions that blended magic with theatrical spectacle. That night, he was performing his signature act called The Lion's Bride. The finale featured Lafayette, his trained lion, and his body double-dressed in identical costume. The act required intricate staging with painted backdrops, silk curtains, and carefully positioned lighting. At approximately 11 o'clock, near the end of the performance, a lamp fell and ignited the stage curtains. The fire spread instantly. The heavy fabrics used in theatrical productions of that era were highly flammable, treated with oils and paints that accelerated the flames. Within seconds, the entire stage was engulfed. The fire safety curtain descended but jammed 3 feet from the bottom, creating a chimney effect that intensified the blaze. The fire moved so quickly that Lafayette and his crew were trapped behind the burning curtains before they could react. The theater had fire exits, but the backstage doors had been locked from the inside. This security measure was intended to prevent unauthorized access during performances. Those locked doors now became a death trap. The orchestra, following strict instructions for emergencies, continued playing God Save the King to prevent panic. The audience evacuated in relative order. filing out through the main exits while the band played. But backstage, there was no escape. Lafayette, his body double, orchestra members, stagehands including 15-year-old Alice Dale, and both the Lion and Horse were sealed behind the flames. The smoke filled the backstage area within minutes. The temperature inside a theater fire can exceed 1,000 degrees. The elaborate costumes Lafayette wore, covered in sequins and fabric, caught fire immediately. Witnesses outside the theater heard screams from within, but the locked doors prevented any rescue attempt. Fire brigades arrived, but the blaze was too intense. By the time they contained the flames, the backstage area was destroyed. 2 days after the fire, workers found Lafayette's actual body beneath the stage, identified by his rings. His body double, C.E. Richards, was discovered in similar condition, making initial identification nearly impossible. The great Lafayette was 40 years old. 11 people perished in total. Actress dies performing death. On November 24th, 1986, the Towson Moose Lodge in Baltimore, Maryland, was hosting a performance of The Drunkard, a melodramatic temperance play from the 1800s. Webster was a stage actress who had performed in this role for 8 years. She was 60 years old and known for her commitment to every role. The play featured exaggerated performances and scripted death scenes, typical of 19th century melodrama. Webster's character was required to sing a song, deliver final lines, and then collapse dramatically on stage as part of the show's climax. The audience expected theatrics. That night, they got something far more real. Webster stepped forward and began singing, "Please Don't Talk About Me When I'm Gone." She moved through the verses and finished the song. She then collapsed onto the stage floor exactly as the script demanded. The audience erupted in applause. They cheered her realistic performance, impressed by how convincingly she had fallen. The other actors on stage continued their lines, moving around her body as the scene required. But something was wrong. Webster was not moving. The stage was blacked out after the grandmother character's death at the end of the second act. Richard Byrd, the director who also played the villain, went on stage and realized Webster had not moved. He broke character immediately and called for help. The audience, still clapping, did not understand what was happening at first. A doctor was called. The applause died. Confusion spread through the crowd as cast members crowded around Webster's motionless body. Medical personnel arrived and began examining her. Edith Webster had suffered a heart attack. She collapsed during her final scene, and the audience had cheered for it. She was transported to St. Joseph Hospital, where she was pronounced dead about 15 minutes after admission. She had suffered 5 previous heart attacks and had undergone heart valve replacement surgery 1 year earlier. On this night, she died performing a death scene, and the audience had cheered for it. Dancer falls from rafters. On September 10th, 1985, the Mutual Life Building in downtown Seattle became the stage for an avant-garde performance unlike anything the city had seen. Takada was a member of Sankai Juku, a Japanese Buto dance troupe known for pushing the boundaries of performance art. The piece was called Jomon Sho, homage to prehistory, subtitled A Dance of Birth and Death. The performance involved 4 dancers suspended upside down by ropes attached to their ankles. They hung from 80 feet above the pavement, their bodies painted white, moving slowly against the exterior wall in synchronized motion. The audience gathered on the street below, looking up at the surreal spectacle. Buto is a dance form that emerged in post-war Japan, characterized by slow, controlled movements and themes of death and transformation. The dancers had rehearsed extensively, and the ropes had been inspected. Everything seemed secure. Around noon, the lunch hour performance began. The 4 dancers descended slowly, their bodies rotating and twisting in deliberate choreography. The crowd watched in fascination. Then, Takada looked up and saw his rope beginning to fray. He reached upward, attempting to grab the rope above the unraveling section. In an instant, it snapped. Takada's body, suspended by his ankles, suddenly had nothing holding it. He began to fall. For those watching from below, time seemed to distort. The fall took only seconds, but witnesses later described it as happening in slow motion. Many thought it was part of the performance. Avant-garde art often blurs the line between reality and illusion. Some in the crowd assumed this sudden plunge was choreographed, a planned dramatic moment. Takada's body accelerated downward, falling through the air with no control, no way to brace for impact. He struck the concrete pavement in front of the Mutual Life Building. A physician in the crowd immediately began CPR. Takada had compound fractures and severe head trauma. He was transported to Harborview Medical Center, where he was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The other 3 dancers stopped their performance, remaining suspended for a few minutes before climbing back to the roof. Screaming began in the crowd. People rushed forward, then stopped, realizing there was nothing they could do. The confusion lasted a few minutes as the performance abruptly halted. Yoshiyuki Takada was 31 years old. He died performing a piece about death. High wire stunt tragedy. On March 22, 1978, the Condado Plaza Hotel in San Juan, Puerto Rico, prepared for a spectacle that would draw crowds from across the city. Wallenda was the 73-year-old patriarch of the Flying Wallendas, a circus family famous for high-wire acts performed without safety nets. He had spent his entire life defying gravity. That day, a steel cable was stretched between two towers of the hotel, suspended 121 feet above the concrete plaza below. Wallenda planned to walk the wire as part of a promotional event. Weather reports showed winds picking up throughout the day, but he insisted on proceeding. He had performed in worse conditions before. Television crews positioned their cameras to capture the crossing. 200 spectators gathered on the ground, craning their necks to watch. Wallenda stepped onto the wire carrying a long balance pole. He moved slowly, placing one foot directly in front of the other. His eyes focused on the tower ahead. Halfway across, the wind intensified. A strong gust hit him from the side. His body swayed. The balance pole shifted in his hands as he struggled to compensate for the force pushing against him. For 30 seconds, he teetered on the wire, fighting to recover, adjusting his weight and repositioning his feet. Then another gust struck. His center of gravity shifted too far. He crouched low, trying to grab the wire with his hands, but his 73-year-old reflexes were not fast enough. His grip missed. His body tilted past the point of recovery. Karl Wallenda fell. The cameras kept rolling. Witnesses on the ground screamed as his body plummeted through the air. He struck a parked taxi below, then bounced onto the pavement. The impact caused massive internal injuries. He was rushed to the hospital, where he was pronounced dead on arrival. The footage from local television station WAPA-TV was later broadcast around the world. Millions watched the moment a legend lost his balance and fell to his death. Investigation revealed the wire had been improperly secured. No net, no second chance. Just 121 feet of empty air and concrete waiting below. Karl Wallenda died doing what he had done his entire life, but this time, gravity won. Health guru dies on air. On June 7th, 1971, the studio of The Dick Cavett Show in New York City prepared to tape an episode featuring two guests. Rodale was a 72-year-old publisher and organic farming pioneer who had built an empire promoting natural health and longevity. He founded Prevention magazine and wrote dozens of books about living longer through proper nutrition. Cavett began the show by interviewing Rodale. The health guru sat in the guest chair, enthusiastic and energetic despite his age. He spoke passionately about his lifestyle choices, his diet of organic foods, and his exercise regimen. He radiated confidence about his physical condition. "I'm going to live to be 100, Rodale declared to the studio audience, unless I'm run down by a sugar-crazed taxi driver. The audience laughed at the joke. He continued talking about his perfect health, explaining how he had not been sick in years and felt stronger than men half his age. Cavett smiled and nodded, steering the conversation forward. After completing Rodale's interview, Cavett brought out his second guest, New York Post columnist Pete Hamill. Rodale remained on stage, seated on the couch beside Hamill. As Cavett and Hamill conversed, Rodale suddenly made a snoring sound. His head slumped over. His body went limp. The studio audience, thinking it was a comedic bit, began to laugh. The timing seemed too perfect. A health guru joking about immortality suddenly pretending to die? It had to be part of the act. Cavett looked over and realized something was wrong. Rodale was not moving. Cavett saw his bloodless pallor. His face had gone deathly pale. Cavett's expression changed immediately from amusement to alarm. He called out for a doctor. The laughter in the studio audience stopped abruptly. Hamill leaned over and whispered, "This looks bad." Medical personnel rushed onto the set. Cameras stopped rolling as crew members cleared space and laid Rodale flat on the floor. They checked for a pulse, began chest compressions. The studio audience sat in stunned silence, finally understanding this was not a joke. J.I. Rodale had suffered a massive heart attack. Despite immediate medical intervention, he could not be revived. He was taken to Roosevelt Hospital and pronounced dead on arrival. The man who had spent decades promoting health and longevity, who had just bragged about living to 100, collapsed on camera in front of a live studio audience. The episode never aired. The footage was locked away and never broadcast. Cobra Strike kills singer. On April 3, 2016, a village concert in Karawang, West Java, attracted an audience eager to see the 29-year-old Indonesian pop singer perform. Irma Bule was known for incorporating dangerous elements into her shows, particularly live snakes that she draped across her body while singing. That night, the show organizers provided a king cobra for her performance. King cobras are among the most venomous snakes in the world. Their neurotoxic venom attacks the nervous system, causing paralysis, respiratory failure, and death if left untreated. A single bite contains enough toxin to kill 20 people. Bule typically performed with non-venomous pythons that had their mouths taped shut. She believed this cobra had been defanged. She was midway through her second song when she stepped backward during a dance move. Her heel came down directly directly on the cobra's tail. The snake reacted instantly, striking her exposed thigh. Its fangs pierced the skin and injected venom deep into her muscle tissue. Boulay stumbled, but did not stop performing. The snake handler removed the cobra and offered her anti-venom that could neutralize the venom if administered quickly. She refused. The show must go on. She continued singing, moving across the stage as the venom began spreading through her bloodstream. For 45 minutes, she performed. The audience watched as she continued her set. Backstage, she reportedly joked with friends that she felt no pain. Around 45 minutes after the bite, symptoms began. She started vomiting and suffering seizures. Her legs weakened. She collapsed onto the stage floor as convulsions took hold. The paralysis had begun. Crew members called for emergency transport. She was loaded into a vehicle and rushed to the nearest hospital, but too much time had passed. The venom had spread too far. She was pronounced dead on arrival at the hospital. Irma Boulay left behind a husband and 3 young children. The mother of 3 had been performing to support her family, earning $25 per show when snakes were included.
Ambush at Alrosa. Darrell Abbott was known to the world as Dimebag. He had built his name as the guitarist for Pantera, one of the defining heavy metal bands of the 1990s, a band whose sound had shaped an entire generation of metal musicians. After Pantera broke up, he formed Damageplan with his brother Vinnie Paul, determined to build a new chapter for the Abbott brothers in the metal world. By December 8, 2004, Damageplan was working the club circuit, the kind of grinding tour schedule bands use to establish a new project. That night they were booked at the Alrosa Villa in Columbus, Ohio, a mid-sized nightclub typical of the rooms metal bands played on tour. The space was intimate enough that fans stood close to the stage rail, and the crowd that night had come specifically to see Dimebag, a guitarist whose riffs had defined an era. The band's head of security was present, along with venue staff and a packed audience pressed near the front of the stage. The show opened the way club shows normally did. The lights came up, the amplifiers were loud, and Damageplan launched into the first song of their set, working through the kind of opening number meant to set the tone for the rest of the night. Then a man rushed the stage from the crowd. He was a former United States Marine, and he was carrying a firearm. He moved directly toward Dimebag and opened fire on him at point-blank range, shooting him multiple times while he stood on stage holding his guitar. The shooting did not stop with Dimebag. The gunman kept firing into the chaos that followed, killing 3 more people in the span of those moments. Among the dead were a venue employee, a fan who had been standing near the stage, and the band's head of security, who had moved toward the threat trying to stop it. In the confusion, the gunman took a hostage inside the club. Patrons scrambled for the exits. Band members and crew tried to make sense of what was happening as the room that had been full of music seconds earlier became a scene of panic and screaming. Columbus police arrived within minutes of the first calls. Officers moved into the building knowing an active shooter was inside and that he had already taken a hostage. A responding officer engaged the gunman directly inside the venue and shot him dead, ending the threat. In the aftermath, first responders worked through the club assessing the wounded and confirming the dead. Dimebag had been shot at close range during the opening song of the set, and the wounds were unsurvivable. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The shooter, the former Marine who had carried out the attack, was killed by the responding police officer inside the Alrosa Villa that night. Electrocuted while tuning. Leslie Harvey was 27 years old and the guitarist for the Scottish rock band Stone the Crows. By 1972, the band had built a steady following on the strength of his playing and the club circuit that carried them through venues across Britain. He was considered one of the more promising guitar talents to come out of the Scottish rock scene of that period, a player whose reputation was still rising. On May 3, 1972, Stone the Crows were booked to play the top-ranked suite in Swansea, Wales. The venue was packed for the show, a typical club date for a touring rock band of the era. The stage had been set up under stage lighting, and a crowd had gathered close to watch the band prepare in the time before the set began. Before the performance started, Harvey was tuning up on stage, going through the routine any guitarist follows before a show. He had his electric guitar in hand, his fingers gripping the metal strings as he worked through the standard checks of pitch and sound ahead of the performance. As part of that routine, Harvey reached out toward a microphone positioned near him on the stage. The microphone had not been properly grounded, with one hand still gripping the metal strings of his guitar and the other making contact with the live microphone. Electrical current passed directly through his body in full view of the gathering crowd. He was electrocuted instantly. Witnesses in the room watched it happen in real time, the moment unfolding in front of an audience that had come to see the band perform. Crew members on site tried to respond immediately, working to cut the power and break the connection running through him. They were unable to safely disconnect the circuit in time to change the outcome. The contact between Harvey, the live microphone, and the guitar strings had created a continuous path for the current, and there was no quick way to interrupt it from outside the circuit without risk to anyone who touched him. Harvey was removed from the stage and prepared for transport to receive medical attention. He did not survive the trip. He was pronounced dead before reaching the hospital, the cause confirmed as electrocution from the ungrounded equipment on stage. The case became one of the defining examples cited afterward in discussions of road crew electrical safety, a reminder of how a single piece of improperly grounded equipment could prove fatal on a stage that, moments earlier, had looked completely ordinary. Cobra Bite Stage. Irma Buell was 29 years old and one of the more recognizable performers on the Indonesian dangdut circuit. Her shows were known for a specific and unusual feature, live venomous snakes, which she incorporated directly into her performances as part of the spectacle that drew crowds to her concerts across the region. The act had become her signature, and audiences came specifically expecting to see it. In 2016, Buell was booked for a performance in Karawang, West Java. The format of the show followed her established act, regional dangdut music paired with the snake handling segment that crowds had come to expect. A snake handler worked alongside her as part of the routine, responsible for managing the animals used during the performance. During the show, Bewley was holding a king cobra as part of the routine. At some point in the segment, she stepped on the tail of the snake she was holding. The cobra reacted to the contact by striking, biting her directly on the thigh in front of the audience watching the performance unfold. In the moments after the bite, Buell believed the snake had already been milked of its venom by the handler beforehand, or she chose to continue regardless. She declined an antidote that was available to her and kept performing, continuing to sing through the rest of the segment and into the following minutes of the show. She continued for approximately 45 minutes after the bite occurred. Over that stretch of time, the venom worked through her system while she remained on stage in front of the crowd, finishing out the performance she had started. Her condition began to deteriorate visibly as the set continued. She started vomiting in front of the audience. Seizures followed, her body reacting to the venom that had been building in her system since the bite. She collapsed on stage, falling into a coma in full view of the crowd that had been watching her perform only minutes before. Responders and medical personnel on site worked to treat her once her condition became clear, but the venom had already had 45 minutes to spread through her body untreated. She did not recover from the coma. Buell was pronounced dead, the cause confirmed as the venomous bite from the king cobra she had been performing with that night. Station nightclub fire. Ty Longley was the guitarist for the rock band Great White, a band that had built its reputation through the 1980s and continued touring clubs across the country into the 2000s. On February 20, 2003, the band was booked for an intimate club show at the Station, a nightclub in West Warwick, Rhode Island. The Station was a small venue, the kind of room where club tour bands like Great White played regularly, with a packed crowd standing close to the stage for the performance. As part of the band's opening, pyrotechnics were set off on stage, a standard part of their live show that had been used at other tour stops without incident before that night. That night, the pyrotechnics ignited flammable acoustic foam that had been installed on the walls of the club. The foam caught fire almost immediately, and flames began spreading rapidly across the surface of the walls surrounding the stage and the crowd. The fire grew quickly, and the room began filling with thick black smoke within moments of the foam igniting. The crowd, packed close to the stage and near the venue's limited exits, began trying to evacuate as the smoke and flames spread through the building. The exits became choked with people trying to escape all at once. Longley initially made it out of the building, escaping through a back door as the fire and smoke filled the club behind him. What happened after that point is disputed. Some accounts say he went back inside to check on fans still trapped in the building, while other accounts say he returned to retrieve his guitar. Neither account has been confirmed as definitive. What is confirmed is that Longley did not make it back out. He died inside the station along with 99 other people, making the fire one of the deadliest nightclub disasters in American history. Firefighters and emergency crews arrived to find a building engulfed in fire, with victims trapped inside by the smoke, flames, and the bottleneck at the limited number of exits. The scale of the casualties became clear only as crews worked through the wreckage in the hours that followed. Longley was confirmed among the 100 people who died in the fire that night, his death attributed to the blaze that consumed the station. The disaster led directly to changes in fire safety regulations for nightclubs and live music venues across the country. including stricter rules on flammable materials and indoor pyrotechnic use. Collapse on cue. Bruce Hampton, known to fans and fellow musicians as Colonel Bruce Hampton, was a fixture of the avant-garde blues rock scene, a band leader and performer whose career stretched back decades, and whose theatrical, often surreal stage presence had become as much a part of his identity as his music. In 2017, Hampton turned 70, and a celebration was organized to mark the occasion. The show was held at the Fox Theater in Atlanta, Georgia, a large and storied venue, and the bill was stacked with guest musicians who had come out specifically to perform alongside Hampton for his birthday. The night was built around collaboration, with musicians rotating on and off stage throughout an extended set, and the crowd was full of longtime fans there to celebrate a career spanning generations. As the night built toward its climax, the musicians on stage moved into a massive group jam of the song Turn On Your Love Light, with Hampton among them performing in front of the packed theater. The energy in the room was high, the kind of celebratory peak the night had been building toward for hours. During the jam, Hampton collapsed, going down onto his knees in front of the band and the crowd. Given his reputation for eccentric and theatrical behavior on stage, both the musicians playing beside him and the fans watching from the crowd assumed it was a deliberate, dramatic gesture, a mock bow consistent with the kind of showmanship Hampton was known for throughout his career. The band kept playing. For several minutes, musicians performed directly next to Hampton's slumped body, with no one on stage or in the crowd recognizing that anything was wrong. The assumption that this was part of the show persisted as the song continued around him. It was only after several minutes that the people on stage realized Hampton was not performing a bit. He had suffered a massive heart attack. Once the situation was understood, those around him moved to respond, and medical attention was sought for him there, in front of the crowd that had been celebrating his birthday moments earlier. Hampton was pronounced dead, the cause confirmed as a massive heart attack suffered during the performance. The collapse, mistaken for theater for several full minutes by everyone present, marked the end of a celebration that had been built specifically to honor his 7 decades. Collapse behind drums. Nick Menza had built his reputation as the drummer for Megadeth during the band's defining run through the 1990s, a period that established him as one of the era's most recognized metal drummers. After leaving Megadeth, Menza continued performing, eventually forming the instrumental band OHM, which blended jazz and metal influences into a sound distinct from his earlier work. On May 21, 2016, Menza was performing with OHM at the Baked Potato, a jazz club in Studio City, California. The Baked Potato was a small, well-known club on the Los Angeles music scene, the kind of intimate room where musicians played to dedicated fans in close quarters, far smaller than the arenas Menza had once filled with Megadeth. The show began normally, with Menza, 51 years old at the time, behind his drum kit as OHM worked through their set in front of the crowd gathered at the club. The band played with the same high energy that had characterized Menza's playing throughout his career, moving through their opening numbers in front of an audience that had come specifically to see him perform. 3 songs into the set, Menza suffered a sudden and catastrophic heart attack. He collapsed forward over his drum kit in the middle of the performance, the kit absorbing his weight as he went down in front of his bandmates and the crowd watching from the floor of the club. Paramedics were called and rushed to the stage once the emergency became apparent. They worked to resuscitate Menza on site, performing aggressive efforts to revive him directly in front of the audience that remained in the club. Despite those efforts, he could not be revived. Menza was pronounced dead, the cause confirmed as cardiac arrest suffered during the performance. He died on the stage of the small club where he had chosen to keep performing years after his time with one of metal's most successful bands. Fall from ladder. Richard Versal was an American operatic tenor with a long career on some of the most prestigious stages in the world, including the Metropolitan Opera in New York City, one of the most recognized opera houses on earth. By January 5, 1996, Versal was an established performer with the company, taking on demanding roles in front of the Met's audiences. That night, the Metropolitan Opera was staging Leos Janáček's The Makropoulos Case, and Versal was performing the role of Vitek. The production called for a particular piece of staging in this scene, with Versal positioned partway up a ladder roughly 20 feet above the stage floor as part of the set design for the moment. The performance had proceeded normally up to that point, the orchestra playing, the audience seated and following the production as it moved through its scenes. Versal, in character as Vitek, was midway up the ladder when he delivered his line for the moment. The line he sang was, "Too bad you can only live so long." Moments after singing it, Versal suffered a massive heart attack, while still positioned on the ladder above the stage. He fell backward off the ladder, dropping the roughly 20 feet to the stage floor below in full view of the audience and the rest of the cast performing around him. The fall happened suddenly, with no warning to those on stage or in the seats watching the production unfold. The performance was halted immediately. Cast members and crew responded to what had happened on stage, and the curtain was brought down in front of an audience that had just watched the moment occur. Medical attention was sought for Versal inside the opera house following the fall. Versal was pronounced dead, the cause confirmed as a massive heart attack. The specific line he had sung only moments before the attack, referencing how long a person can live, became one of the most noted details associated with his death in the years that followed. Collapse in Palestrina. Mark Sandman was the frontman, bassist, and a defining creative force behind Morphine, an alternative rock band known for its distinctive sound built around a two-string slide bass and saxophone. By 1999, Morphine had built a dedicated following through years of touring and a catalog that had established the band as a respected name in the alternative rock scene. On July 3, 1999, Morphine was booked to play the Giardini del Principe Festival in Palestrina, Italy, an outdoor summer show that had drawn a sizable and anticipating crowd. The heat of an Italian summer day bore down on the outdoor festival grounds as the band prepared to take the stage for what was expected to be a standard performance for the touring group. Sandman, 46 years old at the time, took his position on stage as Morphine began their set in front of the gathered crowd. The performance moved forward as expected, the band working through their material under the heat and the physical demands that came with an outdoor summer show. In the middle of the performance, Sandman suddenly collapsed, going down flat on his back on the stage in front of the crowd. The collapse happened abruptly, with no clear warning to the people watching from the audience. The crowd's initial reaction was to cheer. Given Sandman's stage presence and the kind of theatrical moments that could occur during a Morphine performance, many in the audience assumed his collapse was a stylistic pose, a deliberate part of the show rather than a medical emergency unfolding in front of them. Sandman had in fact suffered a massive heart attack, brought on by the combination of severe heat, physical exhaustion from the performance, and underlying stress that had not been visible to those watching him perform. Bandmates and crew on site responded once it became clear the collapse was not part of the act, and emergency medical services were called to the festival grounds. Sandman was transported toward medical care following the collapse. He died in the ambulance on the way to the hospital, the cause confirmed as a heart attack linked to the heat and exhaustion of the performance. His death brought an immediate end to Morphine's active career as a band. Collapse behind booth. Isaac Freeman III, known to audiences worldwide as Fat Man Scoop, had built a career as one of the most recognizable hype men and rappers in the music industry, known for his high-energy stage presence and his ability to drive a crowd into excitement through sheer vocal force. By August 30, 2024, Freeman had spent decades performing at this same level of intensity across countless shows. That night, Freeman was booked to perform at Town Center Park in Hamden, Connecticut, an outdoor public venue that had drawn a crowd out to see him perform live. The setting was typical for the kind of community and festival shows Freeman had continued to play throughout his career, a stage set up in an open park with a DJ booth positioned alongside it. The performance began with Freeman in his element, pacing back and forth across the stage and shouting into the microphone to keep the crowd's energy at a peak, consistent with the style that had defined his career for decades. He worked the stage aggressively, moving the way he always had, driving the crowd through call and response moments that had become his trademark. At a certain point in the performance, Freeman walked behind the DJ booth, moving out of the direct view of the audience watching from the park. Once behind the booth and out of sight of the crowd, he collapsed. The collapse happened away from the audience's direct line of sight, with crew and people positioned near the booth becoming aware of the emergency before the wider crowd did. Freeman suffered a fatal medical episode at that point, exact circumstances of which were not disclosed beyond what was publicly reported. Emergency responders and crew on site moved to attend to him once the emergency became known, working to treat him at the scene before he was removed from the venue. Despite those efforts, he did not survive. Freeman was pronounced dead, the cause stated as a medical episode suffered during the performance. His death drew attention to the physical toll that decades of high-intensity live performance can place on aging performers who continue working at that pace. Tiptoe into silence. Herbert Carey, universally known by his stage name Tiny Tim, was one of the most eccentric and distinctive figures in American pop music history. Armed with a ukulele, a shopping bag, and a soaring, unmistakable falsetto, he achieved massive fame in the late 1960s with his hit cover of Tiptoe Through the Tulips. Decades after his commercial peak, he remained a dedicated touring performer, determined to keep singing despite mounting health complications. On November 30th, 1996, Tiny Tim was booked to perform at a gala benefit hosted by the Women's Club of Minneapolis in Minnesota. He had suffered a severe heart attack just 2 months earlier at a ukulele festival, and his doctors, along with his wife, had strongly warned him that live performing was putting his life at immediate risk. He refused to stop, famously stating that he wanted to die doing what he loved. The gala room was full of guests when Tiny Tim took the stage, accompanied by his wife, who helped him to his position. He opened his set and began singing his signature number, Tiptoe Through the Tulips, for the audience. The performance carried the same manic energy and theatricality that had defined his career for decades. In the middle of the song, his voice faltered. He stopped playing, turned to his wife, and told her that he did not feel well. Before anyone in the room could react or step in to assist him, he collapsed flat on the stage floor in front of the gathered crowd. The audience, accustomed to his erratic and highly dramatic stage movements, initially sat in confusion, unsure if the sudden fall was part of his eccentric act. The realization that it was a medical emergency spread through the room only when his wife and venue staff rushed to his side and found him unresponsive. Medical personnel arrived at the venue and performed aggressive resuscitation efforts on site before rushing him to a nearby hospital. The damage to his heart was too severe. He was pronounced dead later that evening, the cause confirmed as a massive heart attack suffered directly during his most famous song. Quiet exit mid-song. David Olney was a highly revered figure within the American folk and Americana songwriting community. A musician's musician whose literate, poetic storytelling had earned the deep respect of peers like Emmylou Harris and Linda Ronstadt. Over a career spanning 5 decades, Olney had recorded more than 20 albums and maintained a steady touring schedule, performing intimate shows for dedicated folk music fans across the country. On January 18, 2020, Olney was participating in the 30A Songwriters Festival in Santa Rosa Beach, Florida. The event was an intimate, acoustic performance where multiple songwriters sat in a circle on stage, taking turns sharing stories and performing their material on acoustic guitars in front of a quiet, attentive audience. Olney, 71 years old at the time, was in the middle of performing his 3rd song of the set, accompanied by a fellow musician on stage. The atmosphere in the room was entirely calm, with the crowd focused closely on the performance. Without warning, Olney stopped playing mid-tune. He did not drop his guitar, slam into his equipment, or show the kind of violent physical distress usually associated with a sudden collapse. Instead, he paused, calmly apologized to the other musicians and the audience, and simply closed his eyes. He lowered his chin to his chest, remaining seated upright on his stool with his guitar still in his lap. The movement was so serene and quiet that the crowd and his fellow performers assumed he was simply taking a long, emotional pause or focusing his thoughts before continuing the track. It took several moments for the musician sitting next to him to realize that Olney had lost consciousness. He had suffered a sudden, catastrophic heart attack. Once the emergency was understood, doctors in the audience rushed the stage to perform CPR, and emergency services were called to the festival venue. Olney could not be revived. He was pronounced dead, his passing marking a uniquely quiet and gentle exit that unfolded in real time in front of an audience that, seconds earlier, had been listening to the final notes of his music. Rumba King's final verse. Jules Shungu Wembadio Pene Kikumba, known globally to millions of music fans as Papa Wemba, was a towering giant of African music. Celebrated as the king of Congolese rumba, he had spent decades pioneering and transforming world music by blending traditional African sounds with Western rock, carrying the rhythm of the Congo to international arena stages. Beyond his golden voice, he was a massive cultural icon, celebrated for championing a movement that turned high fashion and elegance into a profound statement of pride. On April 24, 2016, Papa Wemba was headlining the urban music festival known as FEMUA in Abidjan, Ivory Coast. The massive outdoor festival grounds were packed with thousands of energetic fans, and the performance was being broadcast live on public television channels across West Africa. The concert was unfolding at a high peak of energy, with Papa Wemba, 66 years old, backed by a full ensemble of musicians and dancers moving through a fast-paced, highly synchronized rhythmic bridge. The crowd was dancing along to a performance that felt like a massive celebration. In the middle of a song, while his dancers were performing at the front of the stage, Papa Wemba suddenly slumped backward and collapsed onto the stage floor. Because the band was playing at maximum volume and the dancers were facing the crowd, Several seconds passed before anyone on stage realized their bandleader had gone down. The television cameras, broadcasting live to thousands of viewers at home, captured the exact moment his fellow performers stopped dancing, spun around in shock, and rushed to his side. The music stopped abruptly, throwing the massive festival crowd into immediate confusion as paramedics rushed the stage in front of the audience. Papa Wemba had suffered an immediate and fatal cardiac arrest. He died before the ambulance could reach the hospital, his sudden passing triggering a massive wave of public mourning across the African continent for a cultural pioneer who had finished his final verse directly on stage. Collapse on the Ocean. John Thomas Hashian, universally known as Sib, cemented his legacy in rock history as the drummer for Boston, playing on their massive self-titled debut album that defined 1970s arena rock. Decades after his peak commercial success, Hashian remained an energetic and dedicated performer, continuing to play the instrument he loved well into his late 60s. In March 2017, Hashian was booked as a featured performer on the Legends of Rock cruise, a music-themed voyage sailing the Caribbean, offering fans an intimate opportunity to see classic rock veterans perform at sea. On March 22nd, the cruise was underway, and Hashian was on stage performing in front of a packed crowd of rock enthusiasts. He was playing a set alongside other notable musicians from his era, driving the rhythm from behind the drum kit with the same power that had characterized his early career. Mid-song, without any prior indication of distress, Hashian suddenly collapsed over his drums. The performance ground to an immediate halt as fellow musicians and crew rushed to his side. Shipboard medical personnel were summoned instantly, and CPR was administered on stage in front of the stunned audience. Despite the use of a defibrillator and aggressive resuscitation efforts by the medical team, Hashian could not be revived. He was pronounced dead on the ship, the cause later confirmed as a massive heart attack, passing away while keeping time for a crowd of dedicated fans out on the open ocean. Blues in Yokohama. Johnny Guitar Watson was a monumental figure in the development of rhythm and blues, funk, and soul music. Over a career spanning 40 years, his blazing guitar style and charismatic stage persona influenced artists ranging from Jimi Hendrix to Frank Zappa. By 1996, Watson was 61 years old and still touring internationally, celebrated as a living legend who refused to slow down or step away from the live performances that fueled his enduring career. On May 17, 1996, Watson was booked for a performance at the Ocean Boulevard Blues Club in Yokohama, Japan. The venue was packed with fans who had come to see the American blues pioneer deliver his signature electric sound. Watson took the stage wearing his trademark fedora and tailored suit, guitar strapped over his shoulder, ready to launch into his opening numbers. As the band started playing, Watson stepped up to the microphone to deliver his first lyrics of the evening. Before he could finish the phrase, he suddenly collapsed forward, falling heavily onto the stage. The audience, initially thinking it was part of his historically flamboyant act, quickly realized the severity of the situation as his bandmates stopped playing and rushed to help him. Emergency medical personnel were called, and Watson was quickly transported to a local hospital. He had suffered a massive, fatal myocardial infarction right as his guitar solo was meant to begin. He was pronounced dead shortly after, leaving behind a legacy that had ended abruptly in the middle of a spotlight in Japan. Final note in Paris. Michael Benjamin, known to millions of fans as Mika Ben, was one of the most versatile and beloved artists in Caribbean music. A singer, songwriter, and producer, he spent over 2 decades crafting hits that blended traditional Haitian compas with modern pop. By 2022, Mika Ben was recognized as a cultural ambassador for Haiti, utilizing his platform to uplift his nation's music globally. On October 15, 2022, Mika Ben was performing at the Accor Arena in Paris, France, an immense venue holding over 10,000 spectators. He had been invited as a guest to perform alongside the legendary Haitian band Karimi for their reunion concert. The energy was electric, with the massive crowd singing along as Mika Ben delivered a soaring, passionate vocal performance of his hit song. As his set concluded, he smiled, waved to the adoring thousands, and turned to walk toward the back of the stage. Just as he reached the wings, out of the direct spotlight but still visible to many in the crowd, he collapsed entirely. First responders rushed to him immediately, performing CPR backstage as the venue fell into a tense, terrified silence. The concert was halted, and the arena was eventually evacuated. Mika Ben had suffered a sudden cardiac arrest and was pronounced dead at the venue, passing away at 41 years old mere seconds after finishing one of the most triumphant performances of his life. The last song in Whistler. Dan McLean, beloved as Country Dick Montana, was the towering frontman and drummer for the Beat Farmers. Known for his unpredictable stage antics and dark humor, he helped pioneer a gritty fusion of punk and country music throughout the 1980s and 90s. By 1995, the Beat Farmers were touring relentlessly, relying on Montana's sheer force of personality to drive their legendary live shows. On November 8, 1995, the band was scheduled to play at the Longhorn Saloon in Whistler, British Columbia. The venue was a bustling, intimate club, perfectly suited for the rowdy energy they were known to deliver. Montana, 40 years old, took the stage to play drums and sing. 3 songs into the performance, the band launched into their track "The Girl I Almost Married." Midway through the song, Montana suddenly slumped over his drum kit. Given his reputation for absurd physical comedy, the audience and even his bandmates assumed he was executing a dramatic bit. The band played on for a few moments, waiting for him to pop back up. When he remained motionless, the reality of the situation sank in. The show was stopped, and emergency services were called. Montana had suffered a fatal heart attack. He could not be resuscitated and was pronounced dead, marking the end of a performer who went out exactly as he had lived.
Collapsed mid-performance. Dick Shawn had spent decades making people laugh in ways that were difficult to categorize. He was not a traditional stand-up comedian, not a straight actor, not a sketch performer in any conventional sense. He was something stranger and more committed than any of those labels suggested. His career stretched back to the 1950s, when he first began appearing in nightclubs and on television, building a reputation as a performer willing to go further than the joke required, to hold a moment past the point of comfort, to let silence do work that other comedians would have filled with noise. He was known for physical commitment, for absurdist premises, for a willingness to subvert the audience's expectations, not just about the punchline, but about the structure of performance itself. By the time the 1980s arrived, Shawn had appeared in films, including a memorable role in It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, had performed on Broadway, and had continued touring with the one-man show format he had refined over years of live performance. On April 17, 1987, Shawn was performing at the University of California, San Diego. The venue was a campus theater, the kind of space with tiered seating and good sightlines, filled that evening with an audience that had come specifically to see him. The crowd was not a passive one. They knew Shawn's reputation. They knew that what looked like an accident might be a choice, that what appeared to be failure might be the point, that the line between performer and performance was something Shawn treated as a suggestion, rather than a boundary. The show proceeded through its material. Shawn was deep into his act when he fell forward onto the stage. He went down without a sound that registered as alarm. He went down the way a man might fall if falling were the next thing written in the script. The audience laughed. This is confirmed in multiple accounts of that evening. The laughter was not cruel. It was the laughter of a crowd that had been trained by the performer himself to distrust the obvious interpretation. Shawn had spent his career teaching audiences that the thing that looked real might be a construction, and that the thing that looked like a construction might be real. On the night of April 17th, that training worked against him completely. He remained on the stage floor. The act did not continue. The music did not shift. The performer did not rise. The audience continued to wait. Accounts vary on exactly how many minutes passed before the uncertainty in the room began to consolidate into something else. What is confirmed is that several minutes elapsed. People watched. Some still laughed. Some stopped laughing and watched more carefully. The specific moment when the collective understanding shifted is not recorded, but it did shift. Someone moved toward the stage. Others followed. What they found was a man who had collapsed from a heart attack, prompting a rapid medical response that rushed him to a nearby hospital, where he was later pronounced dead. Emergency responders were contacted. The venue, a university campus, had medical resources nearby. Responders arrived rapidly and worked on Shawn right there on the stage before the transfer could take place. The full timeline of those attempts is not in the public record, and exact details of what was tried and for how long were not publicly disclosed. What was disclosed is that the attempts were unsuccessful. Dick Shawn was 63 years old. He was pronounced dead. The cause of death was a heart attack. The audience that watched him fall had no way of knowing in the moment that they were watching the last thing he would ever do on a stage. The act they thought they were seeing was not an act. Millions watched live. Tommy Cooper was one of the most recognized comedians in Britain. His career had run for decades through the middle of the 20th century, built on a specific and immediately identifiable persona. He wore a fez. He performed magic tricks that failed in ways that were more precisely controlled than any trick that succeeded. The failures were not accidents. They were constructions of extraordinary precision, timed and paced and calibrated to produce a specific quality of laughter. The laughter that comes from watching someone apparently incompetent operate with total confidence. Cooper had performed this act across British television for years, had appeared on nearly every major variety program the country produced, and had become, by the 1980s, not merely a famous comedian, but something closer to a national institution. On April 15, 1984, Cooper was one of the performers appearing on Live from Her Majesty's, a variety program broadcast on ITV. The show was produced at Her Majesty's Theatre in London, one of the older and more formally appointed theatres in the West End, a venue with a long history of variety performance and a capacity that filled the room with a substantial seated audience. The broadcast was live, there was no delay. What the studio audience saw, the television audience saw simultaneously. Cooper took the stage during the broadcast and moved through his act. He was in a long robe, which was itself part of the performance, a costume element consistent with some of his stage work. The audience in the theater was engaged. The at-home audience was watching. At some point during the act, Cooper sat down, or appeared to sit down, or collapsed into a sitting and then a prone position. The witnesses in the theater and the viewers at home saw a large man go down in a way that was consistent with a Tommy Cooper bit. He was a performer whose entire professional identity was built on the controlled appearance of losing control. The audience laughed. The laughter is documented. It is part of the broadcast record, which exists and has been reviewed. Cooper did not get up. A woman who was performing with him that evening was nearby on stage. She moved toward him. Other people moved toward him. The moment when the performance stopped being a performance was visible on camera, though the precise second is difficult to identify because the transition from act to emergency was gradual. Cooper was moved backstage. He was not able to be revived at the theater. He was transported to Westminster Hospital in London. The specific timeline of transport and hospital arrival is not fully detailed in the public record. Medical teams at the hospital were unable to save him. Tommy Cooper was 63 years old. He was pronounced dead. The cause of death was a heart attack. The broadcast in which he died was live, carried into homes across Britain in real time. The audience in the theater and the audience watching from their living rooms had laughed as he collapsed. Most of them did not know, while they were laughing, that they were watching him die. Sanford's last scene. Redd Foxx had one of the longest and most varied careers in American comedy. He started in the 1940s performing on the Chitlin Circuit, the network of venues that served black audiences in a segregated entertainment industry. He recorded dozens of comedy albums through the 1950s and 60s, albums that circulated widely but were considered too explicit for mainstream radio. He was a working comedian for more than 20 years before the role that changed his public profile arrived. In 1972, Foxx was cast as Fred Sanford in Sanford and Son, a sitcom produced for NBC. The show ran for 6 seasons and made Foxx one of the most recognized comedic performers on American television. His character, a cantankerous junk dealer in the Watts neighborhood of Los Angeles, had a recurring bit that became one of the most well-known physical comedy routines in the history of the medium. When Fred Sanford wanted to avoid a confrontation or manipulate a situation or simply get out of something he did not want to do, he would clutch his chest, look skyward, and announce that he was having a heart attack. He would call out to his deceased wife Elizabeth, tell her he was coming to join her. The audience laughed every time. The bit worked because the performance was completely committed and completely transparent at once. By 1991, Foxx was working on a new sitcom called The Royal Family, produced for CBS. He was cast alongside Della Reese. Production was underway in Hollywood, California, and the cast and crew were in the rhythm of regular rehearsal days. On October 11, 1991, Foxx was on the set of The Royal Family during a rehearsal session. Cast members were present. Crew members were present. Della Reese was on set. The work of the day was underway. Foxx collapsed. The accounts of the immediate witness reaction include the detail that some people present, seeing a man clutch his chest and go down on a television set, thought of Fred Sanford. The collapse looked, in the first moments, like something Redd Foxx's most famous character had done dozens of times on camera. The reference was available to everyone in that room. It was part of the air of the moment. He was not performing. Emergency services were contacted. Foxx was transported from the set to Queen of Angels Hollywood Presbyterian Medical Center. The specific timeline of transport of what was attempted at the scene and what was attempted at the hospital is not fully detailed in the public record. Exact medical interventions were not publicly disclosed. Redd Foxx died on the evening of October 11, 1991. He was 68 years old. The cause of death was a heart attack. The cast and crew who had been present on the set that day had watched a man collapse and in the first moments had not known whether it was a man or a character falling down. Final standing ovation. Eric Morecambe was half of Morecambe and Wise, the comedy duo that had defined a particular era of British entertainment. He and Ernie Wise had been performing together since the 1940s, had moved through music hall, radio, and into television, and by the 1960s and 70s had become the most watched double act in British broadcasting. Their Christmas specials, produced for the BBC and later for ITV, drew audiences in the tens of millions. In a country where television had a limited number of channels and the culture of shared viewing was still largely intact, Morecambe and Wise were not simply popular, they were a fixture. Eric Morecambe was also a man with a documented history of heart disease. He had survived a heart attack in 1968 and had undergone cardiac surgery. He continued performing through the 1970s and into the 80s, and those who worked with him were aware that his health was a consideration. He continued regardless. On May 28, 1984, Morecambe was performing at the Roses Theatre in Tewkesbury, England. The Roses Theatre was a mid-sized venue, the kind of regional theatre that hosted touring productions and solo performances, a building with a stage and raked seating and the particular quality of attention that smaller venues produce in their audiences. The show that evening, a live question and answer session hosted by a close friend, was a success. The audience responded with enthusiasm throughout. At the end of the performance, Morecambe took his curtain calls. The audience gave him a standing ovation. He stood on the stage and received it. He was 58 years old, and he had just completed a successful performance in front of an audience that was on its feet. He walked off the stage, having playfully rushed back out to join the band and play the instruments for 6 final curtain calls. He stepped toward the wings for the final time and collapsed. It was right there at the edge of the stage, still within the residual energy of the performance and steps from the lights, that he collapsed. People who were backstage responded immediately. Emergency services were contacted. Morecambe was transported to Cheltenham General Hospital. The distance between Tewkesbury and Cheltenham is short, and transport would have been rapid. Medical teams at the hospital worked to stabilize him. Those efforts were unsuccessful. Eric Morecambe died in the early hours of May 29, 1984. He was 58 years old. The cause of death was a heart attack. The last thing he did in a professional context was walk out onto a stage and receive a standing ovation from an audience that loved him. The last thing the audience saw was a man taking his bow. Interval never returned. Leonard Rossiter built his career on precision. He was known among directors and co-performers as a technically demanding actor and comedian, someone who tracked timing with an exactness that could exhaust the people around him. He had been trained in theater and had moved through stage work and into television, where he found the roles that made him a recognizable name across British households. His performances as Rigsby in Rising Damp and as Reginald Perrin in The Fall and Rise of Reginald Perrin were not the performances of a comedian who improvised his way through a scene. They were the product of a performer who knew exactly what he was doing at every moment. By 1984, Rossiter was appearing on stage in London in a production of Loot, the black comedy written by Joe Orton. The play was running at the Lyric Theatre in the West End, a venue with a history going back to the 1880s, a mid-sized house with a formal interior and the particular atmospheric quality of a theatre that has hosted a great many things. Rossiter was the lead. The production was drawing audiences. On October 5th, 1984, the Lyric Theatre had a full or near-full house for the evening performance of Loot. The first act proceeded. The interval arrived, the standard pause in the middle of a theatrical performance where the house lights come up, the audience moves to the bars and the lobbies, and the performers return to their dressing rooms. Rossiter went to his dressing room. He collapsed there, in his dressing room, during the interval. The audience was in the theater. They were in the lobby, at the bar, in their seats, waiting for the second act. They did not know what was happening backstage. The interval is a suspended moment in any theatrical evening, a pause that holds the audience between what they have seen and what they are about to see. On October 5th, the second act of Loot would not begin, transforming the empty stage into a sudden, silent void right in front of the waiting audience. The people who discovered Rossiter in his dressing room contacted emergency services. He was transported from the Lyric Theatre to a hospital. Medical teams assessed him and worked to stabilize his condition. Those efforts could not succeed. Leonard Rossiter was 57 years old. He was pronounced dead. The cause of death was hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, a condition of the heart muscle. The audience at the Lyric Theatre that evening eventually learned that the show would not continue. The performer they had come to watch had died in his dressing room, while they waited in the lobby for the lights to go down again. Live and unscripted. Tiny Tim occupied a strange and specific place in American entertainment. His real name was Herbert Corey. He had worked for years on the fringes of the music and comedy worlds before a series of television appearances in the late 1960s brought him to a vast mainstream audience. His signature performance was the song Tiptoe Through the Tulips, delivered in a high falsetto that he accompanied on a ukulele. He was tall and thin, with long dark hair, and the combination of his physical appearance, his vocal register, and his apparent earnestness produced a reaction in audiences that sat somewhere between delight and bewilderment. He was understood, broadly, as a novelty act, a figure of comedy by virtue of existing in a way that resisted easy categorization. His most famous single moment of public visibility came in December of 1969, when he married a woman known publicly as Miss Vicky on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. The ceremony was broadcast live. 40 million people watched. It was one of the highest-rated Tonight Show episodes in the program's history. By the 1990s, Tiny Tim was performing at smaller venues. His mainstream moment had passed, but he continued to work, appearing at events and engagements that sought his particular quality of performance. His age at this point is a matter of some dispute in the public record, with different sources assigning different birth years. This outline notes that dispute and does not resolve it. He was in his 60s. On November 30th, 1996, Tiny Tim was performing at the Women's Club of Minneapolis. The event was a gala benefit, the kind of formal fundraising occasion held in a large room with tables and a stage and an audience that had paid to attend. He had appeared at this kind of event before. He took the stage and began performing. He was playing Tiptoe Through the Tulips, having just completed the performance of that song, the one most associated with him, the one he had sung on national television in front of tens of millions of people. Tiny Tim was being assisted back to his table by his wife when he collapsed. People near the stage moved toward him immediately. He was assisted and removed from the performance area. The audience in the room witnessed the collapse and the response. Emergency services were contacted. Tiny Tim was transported to Hennepin County Medical Center in Minneapolis. Medical teams at the hospital received him and worked to address his condition. The specific details of what was attempted and for how long are not in the detailed public record, and exact medical interventions were not publicly disclosed. Tiny Tim was pronounced dead. The cause of death was heart failure. His age at the time of death is listed differently in different sources, a discrepancy that originates in conflicting records of his birth year. He collapsed just moments after performing the song that had defined his public identity, falling in front of the very audience that had come to see him perform it. Collapse at mid-court. Hank Gathers was 23 years old and the most dominant college basketball player in the country when he walked onto the floor at Gersten Pavilion in Los Angeles on March 4th, 1990. He was there to play a West Coast Conference Tournament semifinal for Loyola Marymount University. He would not walk off that floor under his own power. Gathers had arrived at Loyola Marymount as a transfer from the University of Southern California, and by his junior year, he had transformed into something the college game rarely produced. He led the entire nation in both scoring and rebounding simultaneously during the 1988 to 1989 season. That combination had been achieved by only one other player in the history of college basketball. His averages were not the product of a system that inflated statistics. Loyola Marymount ran a genuine up-tempo offense under head coach Paul Westhead, a system designed to generate as many possessions as possible, and Gathers was the engine at the center of it. He scored, he rebounded, he ran the floor. He was the reason people came to watch. Gersten Pavilion was Loyola Marymount's home arena, a modest facility by major conference standards, but a place where the Lions had developed a following built on the team's extraordinary offensive production. For the WCC tournament, the atmosphere carried additional weight. This was a postseason game with implications for the NCAA tournament. Gathers was playing in front of teammates, coaches, fans, and the broader college basketball community that had spent the season watching his numbers climb. Earlier that same season, in December of 1989, Gathers had collapsed during a game. That collapse had led to a diagnosis. According to reports, he was found to have a cardiac arrhythmia, an irregular heart rhythm abnormality known as exercise-induced ventricular tachycardia, and was prescribed a beta blocker to keep his heartbeat stable. He was placed on medication to manage the condition. According to accounts from people close to him at the time, Gathers had raised concerns about how the medication affected his performance on the court, reporting that it made him feel slower and less effective than he was accustomed to feeling. The specific details of what dosage adjustments, if any, were made to his medication in the weeks that followed remain a subject of reported dispute, and were not fully resolved in public record. What is confirmed is that Gathers returned to play after the December collapse. He continued performing at an elite level. On March 4th, 1990, He took the floor for the WCC semifinal and played the way he always played. In the first half, Gathers received a pass near the basket. He elevated, caught the ball above the rim, and finished an alley-oop dunk. The play was routine for him. He had done it hundreds of times. He landed and began jogging back toward the defensive end of the court. He did not make it. Seconds after landing from the dunk, without contact from any opposing player, Gathers fell to the court near the midcourt line. There was no collision, no stumble, no visible mechanical cause. He simply went down. He attempted to get up. According to accounts from those present at the scene, he said, I don't want to lay down. He was conscious briefly and resisting. Then he lost consciousness entirely and did not regain it. Teammates and staff reached him within seconds. The arena, which had been loud moments before, went quiet. Players from both teams stopped. Coaches came onto the floor. The crowd, which had just watched Gathers complete a dunk, now watched medical personnel run onto the court and begin CPR. Resuscitation efforts were performed on the floor of Gersten Pavilion. Paramedics arrived and continued working on him. The decision was made to transport him to Daniel Freeman Marina Hospital in the Marina del Rey area of Los Angeles. He was moved from the arena floor and taken by ambulance. At the hospital, medical staff continued their efforts. They were not able to revive him. Hank Gathers was pronounced dead on March 4, 1990. The cause of death was hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. He was 23 years old. The footage of his collapse, the empty court, the silent arena, and the stillness of the crowd in the moments that followed remain some of the most chilling material ever captured in a college sports broadcast. Bouncer below helmet. Philip Hughes was 25 years old and a professional cricketer for Australia when he took his position at the crease at the Sydney Cricket Ground on November 25, 2014. He was playing in a Sheffield Shield match, Australia's premier domestic first-class cricket competition. The ball that ended his life was delivered legally, in the normal course of the game, by a bowler doing exactly what fast bowlers are trained to do. Hughes had played Test cricket for Australia and was considered an established presence in Australian batting. He had made his international debut years earlier and had navigated the pressures of competing at the highest level of the sport. By November of 2014, he was in domestic competition, playing Sheffield Shield cricket for South Australia against New South Wales at the Sydney Cricket Ground, one of the oldest and most storied venues in the sport. The ground sits in the Moore Park precinct of Sydney and has hosted cricket since the 1870s. For a Sheffield Shield match, the crowd was modest compared to international fixtures, but the players and officials present were professionals operating within the full structure of the game. The Sheffield Shield is contested between Australian state teams and serves as the primary pathway for players seeking selection to the national side. The match was standard in every observable respect. Hughes had batted before, faced bouncers before, and worn a helmet, as all batsmen do, in compliance with standard practice at every level of professional cricket. A bouncer is a delivery in which the bowler pitches the ball short of a length, causing it to rise steeply toward the batsman's head and upper body. It is a legal delivery and a standard tactical weapon used by fast bowlers at every level of the game. On November 25, 2014, New South Wales fast bowler Sean Abbott bowled a short pitch delivery to Hughes. The ball rose sharply. It made contact with Hughes just below his left ear, in the gap between the lower edge of his helmet and the protective grill that covered his face. Cricket helmets of the design in use at that time left a section of the neck and lower head exposed at that specific angle. The ball struck that unprotected area. Hughes lost his footing immediately. He collapsed forward and fell face first onto the pitch. He was unconscious when he hit the ground. He did not attempt to break his fall. Players from both sides converged on him. There was no ambiguity about the severity of what had happened. Medical personnel from the ground staff reached him and began assessment. Mouth-to-mouth resuscitation and ventilatory support were initiated on the field of play to assist his breathing. An ambulance was called and Hughes was transported to St. Vincent's Hospital in Sydney. At St. Vincent's, he was assessed and underwent emergency surgery. The injury was a subarachnoid hemorrhage caused by a ruptured vertebral artery. The impact of the ball had torn an artery in his neck, producing a massive bleed in his brain. The surgery was performed, but Hughes did not regain consciousness. He was placed on life support and remained in that condition for 2 days. His family and teammates gathered at the hospital during that period. On November 27, 2014, he was pronounced dead. He was 25 years old. The cause of death was a subarachnoid hemorrhage resulting from a ruptured vertebral artery. In direct response to his death, Cricket Australia and the sport's governing bodies mandated the redesign of cricket helmets to extend protection to the area of the neck and lower ear where the ball had made contact. The helmet that failed to protect Hughes is no longer the standard in professional cricket. Center circle collapse. Marc-Vivien Foé was 28 years old and a professional footballer for Cameroon when he collapsed collapsed in the center circle of the Stade de Gerland in Lyon, France, on June 26, 2003. He was playing in the semi-final of the FIFA Confederations Cup. No other player was near him when he fell. Foé was an experienced professional who had built his club career across several European leagues. At the time of the 2003 Confederations Cup, he was on loan at Manchester City from Olympique Lyonnais, the Lion club whose home ground was the Stade de Gerland, the very stadium where he would die. He was a central midfielder, physically imposing and technically capable, and he had been a consistent contributor to the Cameroonian national team across several years of international competition. The FIFA Confederations Cup is a tournament held in the country that will host the following year's World Cup, featuring the champions of each continental confederation alongside the World Cup host and the reigning World Cup winner. The 2003 edition was held in France. Cameroon had advanced to the semi-final stage where they faced Colombia. The match was broadcast live on international television and was watched across multiple continents. The Stade de Gerland had a capacity of around 41,000 and was well populated for a Confederations Cup semi-final involving one of Africa's most successful footballing nations. The match had reached the 72nd minute. Foé was in the center circle, in open play, not in a challenge, not in physical contact with any opposing player. The cameras were covering the flow of play. He collapsed. There was no contact, no trip, no medical event that was externally visible before the fall. Live broadcast footage captured him going down, and according to accounts from witnesses at the ground, his eyes rolled back as he fell. He made no attempt to catch himself. He landed and did not move. Players from both Cameroon and Colombia immediately recognized that this was not a standard injury. Arms went up. Players waved urgently toward the sideline. Medical personnel ran onto the pitch from the touchline. The match was halted. Resuscitation was begun on the pitch and continued for a period reported at approximately 45 minutes. During that time, medical staff worked on Foé at the center of the field and then moved him to the sideline, where efforts continued. The crowd in the stadium was largely still. Other players stood or knelt on the pitch. The full scope of what was happening was visible to everyone present in the stadium and to viewers watching the live broadcast in multiple countries. Despite the sustained resuscitation effort, Foé could not be revived. He was pronounced dead at the stadium on June 26, 2003. The cause of death was hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, specifically an enlarged left ventricle, a condition in which the heart muscle is abnormally thickened in a way that can cause it to fail without warning during physical exertion. He had not been diagnosed with the condition prior to his death. The image of his collapse, broadcast live on international television to an audience in the millions, became one of the most widely seen moments of an athlete dying in competition. 14th round. Duk Koo Kim was a South Korean boxer who traveled to Las Vegas, Nevada in November of 1982 to fight for the WBA lightweight championship of the world. His opponent was Ray Mancini, the reigning champion, a popular and aggressive fighter from Youngstown, Ohio. The fight was scheduled for 15 rounds and was broadcast on national television in the United States. Kim did not survive the night. Caesars Palace in Las Vegas was among the most prestigious boxing venues in the world in 1982. Championship fights held on its premises drew large crowds and significant television audiences. The WBA lightweight championship fight between Mancini and Kim was a high-profile card. Mancini had cultivated a reputation as an exciting fighter, whose aggressive style and likable public persona made him a draw for casual and dedicated boxing fans alike. Kim was a challenger who had compiled a record in South Korea and was making his most significant appearance in the sport on the largest stage of his career. From the opening rounds, the fight was brutal. Kim absorbed punishment throughout the contest, but continued to press forward and engage. The fight was competitive in the way that absorbing championship fights often are, with both men landing significant blows across the early and middle rounds. Kim demonstrated the durability that had brought him to a title fight, but the accumulation of damage over 13 rounds was substantial. In the 14th round, Mancini landed a series of punches that drove Kim backward and into the ropes. Kim could no longer adequately defend himself. Referee Richard Green, who was the third man in the ring that evening, stopped the fight. Kim was standing when the bout was halted but was not in a condition to continue. What happened next occurred within minutes of the stoppage. Kim collapsed. He lost consciousness in the ring after the fight had already been stopped and was no longer in progress. He did not fall during the contest itself, but in the immediate aftermath of it, as he stood in the ring following the referee's intervention. Medical personnel entered the ring and assessed him. He was unresponsive. The decision was made to transport him by ambulance to a hospital in Las Vegas. He was diagnosed with the subdural hematoma, a bleed between the surface of the brain and the skull, caused by the forces his brain had sustained during the fight. Surgery was performed. He did not regain consciousness. Kim remained in a coma following the surgery. He died 4 days after the fight on November 17, 1982. The cause of death was the subdural hematoma sustained during the bout. He was less than 2 rounds of championship boxing away from surviving, in the sense that the fight was nearly complete when the injuries proved unsurvivable. In direct response to his death, the sport's major sanctioning bodies reduced the maximum number of rounds in championship fights from 15 to 12. That change has remained in effect across all major boxing organizations from that point forward. The 14 rounds Kim fought before collapsing are the reason no championship fight today goes beyond 12. Mountain, heat, amphetamines. Tommy Simpson was a professional road cyclist and the leader of the British national cycling team when he took to the roads of southern France in July of 1967 for the Tour de France. He did not finish the race. He died on the upper slopes of Mont Ventoux during the 13th stage on July 13, 1967, in full view of the thousands of spectators who lined the mountain road to watch the world's most famous bicycle race. Simpson was one of the most accomplished British cyclists of his era. He had won the World Road Race Championship in 1965 and had established himself as a credible competitor in the major European stage races at a time when British success in continental road cycling was relatively uncommon. The Tour de France was the pinnacle of the sport, and Simpson had competed in it before. In 1967, he was 29 years old and considered a serious competitor. The 13th stage of the 1967 Tour de France required riders to cross Mont Ventoux, a mountain in the Provence region of southern France that sits at an elevation of 1,912 meters above sea level. Mont Ventoux is unlike most alpine or Pyrenean climbs in one specific way. Its upper section, above the tree line, is completely exposed. There are no trees to provide shade, no vegetation to reduce the intensity of the sun, and the pale limestone surface of the upper mountain reflects heat back upward at riders as they climb. Temperatures on the upper slopes of Ventoux in summer can reach extreme levels. On July 13, 1967, conditions on the mountain were reported to be exceptionally harsh, with high heat bearing down on the field of riders from the time they began the ascent. The roads of the Tour de France at that time, particularly on major mountain stages, were lined with spectators, team vehicles, and support personnel. Mechanics followed the riders on motorcycles or in cars carrying spare equipment and providing on-road assistance. Spectators stood at the roadside, sometimes only meters from the riders, cheering them through. The atmosphere on a major Ventoux climb was dense, chaotic, and loud, with fans pressing close as the cyclists struggled past. As the riders moved up the exposed upper section of Ventoux, Simpson began to show signs of serious distress. His line across the road became erratic. He was zigzagging, unable to hold a straight course. Other riders and observers on the mountain noticed his trajectory. He was not descending, and he was not stopping deliberately. He was losing control of his body while still attempting to climb. He collapsed at the side of the road. Spectators and team mechanics who were nearby reached him. He was conscious at that moment. He reportedly said, on, though popular myth later substituted the words with the phrase, "Put me back on my bike." While the famous line about his bicycle was actually a later journalistic invention, his frantic determination to keep moving was verified by the team mechanic, who briefly helped him up. He was placed back on his bicycle. He rode approximately 500 yards further up the mountain before collapsing a second time. He did not rise again. Race officials and medical personnel were summoned. Emergency responders reached him on the upper mountain and attended to him at the scene. Resuscitation was attempted. He could not be revived. He was transported from the mountain by emergency personnel. Tommy Simpson was pronounced dead on July 13, 1967. The autopsy conducted following his death revealed that he had died of heat exhaustion and dehydration, compounded by the presence of amphetamines in his system. A memorial stone marking the location of his second and final collapse on the upper slopes of Mont Ventoux was erected and remains there. Cyclists who ride Ventoux today frequently leave tokens at the memorial as they pass. Tamburello Wall. Ayrton Senna was a 3-time Formula One world champion and the most celebrated racing driver of his generation when his car left the track at the Tamburello corner of the Autodromo Enzo Dino Ferrari in Imola, Italy, on May 1, 1994. He was traveling at approximately 190 miles per hour when his car struck a concrete retaining wall. He did not survive. Senna had won his 3 world championships in 1988, 1990, and 1991. By 1994, he was driving for the Williams team, widely considered one of the most competitive cars in the field. The San Marino Grand Prix was the third race of the 1994 season. It was held at Imola, a circuit in the Emilia-Romagna region of northern Italy with a layout that included several corners, taken at very high speed. The race was broadcast live internationally and was followed by an enormous global television audience. The 1994 San Marino Grand Prix weekend had already been marked by serious incidents before race day. During qualifying on Saturday, April 30th, Austrian driver Roland Ratzenberger was killed when his car left the track at high speed. It was the first driver fatality in Formula One in nearly a decade. The mood across the paddock and among the broadcast teams covering the event on Sunday was already affected by what had happened the day before. On race day, May 1st, the San Marino Grand Prix began under a safety car period following a separate incident at the start. When the safety car pulled in and racing resumed, Senna led the field. He was the fastest car on track and was controlling the race from the front. On the 7th lap, Senna's car approached the Tamburello corner. Tamburello was a high-speed left-hand curve that drivers of that era took, without lifting the throttle, meaning they carried full speed through the bend. His car ran off the racing line. It crossed the edge of the track surface and traveled across the runoff area at undiminished speed, before striking the concrete retaining wall that bordered the outer edge of the corner. The impact was severe and immediate. A fragment of the front suspension of the car was later determined, in the official investigation, to have penetrated the visor of Senna's helmet. The fragment caused fatal skull fractures. The crash was broadcast live to the millions of viewers watching the race. The television cameras captured the car leaving the track and the impact with the wall. After the car came to rest, Senna did not move. Medical vehicles and personnel stationed around the circuit responded immediately. Professor Sid Watkins, the Formula One medical delegate and a neurosurgeon who had developed a close personal friendship with Senna over the preceding years, was among the first to reach him at trackside. Watkins later stated publicly in his memoir and in interviews that he believed from the moment he reached Senna that the injuries were unsurvivable. Watkins and the medical team present at the scene performed initial assessment and began stabilization procedures. Senna was airlifted from the circuit to the Maggiore Hospital in Bologna. He arrived at the hospital and was placed on life support. The injuries he had sustained in the impact were documented in the official medical and legal proceedings that followed. He did not regain consciousness at any point after the crash. Ayrton Senna was pronounced dead on May 1st, 1994. The cause of death was skull fractures, caused by the penetration of a suspension fragment through his helmet visor during the impact at Tamburello. His death, combined with the death of Ratzenberger the previous day, triggered the most comprehensive review of safety standards in the history of Formula One. Circuit designs were altered, car construction regulations were rewritten, cockpit protection requirements were strengthened, and the overall approach to driver safety in the sport was restructured in the years that followed. The modern Formula One safety environment, which has prevented fatalities in the sport for many years since, is in significant part a product of what happened at Tamburello on May 1st, 1994. Thrown from Whistler, Nodar Kumaratashvili was 21 years old and a Luger representing Georgia when he arrived at the Whistler Sliding Center in Whistler, British Columbia, Canada, on February 12, 2010. He was there for a training run scheduled hours before the opening ceremony of the Vancouver Winter Olympics. He was killed before the games officially began. The 2010 Winter Olympics were hosted in and around Vancouver, British Columbia. The sliding events, which included luge, skeleton, and bobsled, were held at the Whistler Sliding Center, a purpose-built facility located approximately 125 kilometers north of Vancouver in the mountains north of the city. The track had been constructed for the Games and had been in use for practice and test events in the period leading up to the Olympics. In the weeks and days before the games opened, athletes and their coaches had raised observations about the speed of the Whistler track. The track's design and elevation profile generated speeds that were among the fastest recorded on any luge track in the world at that time. These observations were documented and had been noted by governing bodies and officials connected to the competition. Kumaratashvili had completed previous training runs at the facility in the days before February 12th and was familiar with the track from those sessions. Training runs on race morning before the opening ceremony were a standard part of the pre-competition schedule for sliding events. Athletes made timed practice runs to build familiarity with the course conditions on the day. Kumaratashvili was among the Lugers taking runs that morning. Other athletes and officials were present at the facility. The Olympic broadcast infrastructure was already in place and running as coverage of pre-games activity had begun in advance of the official opening. On his final training run, Kumaratashvili traveled through the course and reached the bottom section of the track. He came out of the final curve. He was traveling at nearly 90 miles per hour. In the transition out of that curve, he lost control of his sled. The sled carried him upward along the inside wall of the track. He was ejected over the sidewall of the track at the exit of the curve. He left the track entirely and became airborne outside the structure. He struck a steel support pole that formed part of the roof structure of the track. The pole at the point of impact was not padded. The crash was captured by the Olympic broadcast cameras that were running at the facility as part of the pre-games coverage infrastructure. The footage was broadcast on Olympic feeds. Emergency personnel stationed at the Whistler Sliding Center responded immediately. Medical staff reached Kumartashvili at the scene and assessed him. He was attended to outside the track structure where he had come to rest after striking the pole. He was transported to a medical facility. He was pronounced dead shortly after the crash. In the immediate aftermath, the Whistler Sliding Center was closed for assessment. Olympic and track officials reviewed the facility. Before competition resumed, physical modifications were made to the track, including the addition of padding to the steel support structures and adjustments to the sidewall height at the exit of the final curve where the ejection had occurred. Those modifications were completed before the luge competition began as part of the Olympic schedule. Nodar Kumartashvili was pronounced dead on February 12th, 2010. He was 21 years old. The crash and its broadcast on Olympic coverage, hours before the games officially opened, prompted immediate examination of track safety standards at Whistler and initiated broader review of luge track design and speed management at the international level. 78-foot fall. Owen Hart was a professional wrestler performing for the WWE when he was rigged into a harness above the floor of Kemper Arena in Kansas City, Missouri on May 23, 1999. He was preparing to descend from the rafters into the ring as part of his entrance for a match at the Over the Edge pay-per-view event. He fell 78 feet and did not survive the fall. Hart was a veteran of professional wrestling, trained from a young age within the Hart family, one of the most accomplished wrestling families in the history of the sport. By 1999, he had performed for years at the highest level of the industry, competing in notable matches and feuds across his career. At the time of Over the Edge, he was performing under a character known as the Blue Blazer, a superhero-themed persona that involved theatrical costuming and an exaggerated on-screen presentation. The Over the Edge pay-per-view was a live event held at Kemper Arena in Kansas City, Missouri, before an announced attendance of more than 16,000 fans who had purchased tickets and were present in the building. Pay-per-view events of this scale in 1999 were significant commercial and production undertakings. The arenas were set up with television production infrastructure, including multiple camera positions, broadcast commentary teams, and large video screens for the live audience. The events ran for several hours and included multiple matches across the evening. Hart's planned entrance for his match that evening involved being suspended in a harness and cable system in the rafters of Kemper Arena, then being lowered from a height down toward the ring, arriving in character as the Blue Blazer in a way consistent with the theatrical presentation the character called for. This style of dramatic entrance was not an untested idea in the context of large-scale live entertainment productions. The rigging for the entrance had been set up above the arena floor as part of the event's pre-show preparation. Hart was fitted into the harness above the arena floor in the elevated structure of the building. The descent was intended to be controlled, lowered by cable from the rafters to the ring. The quick release mechanism on the harness triggered prematurely. Hart was not in position to be lowered in a controlled manner at the moment the mechanism released. He fell. He fell 78 feet. He landed chest first on the top rope of the wrestling ring below. Most people inside Kemper Arena did not realize what was happening at the moment of the accident. More than 16,000 fans were in the building. The arena lights were turned down in the building while the promotional video played, leaving the crowd completely in the dark. At the moment of the fall, the WWE's television production was airing a pre-recorded video package as part of the broadcast, and the pay-per-view audience watching at home did not see the fall itself. The live crowd in Kemper Arena had no such buffer. They did not see the descent or the impact clearly, only realizing something had gone terribly wrong when the house lights came back up and medical personnel rushed down. Ring personnel and emergency medical staff responded immediately. Hart was attended to in the ring by those who reached him first. Paramedics arrived at the ringside area and assessed his injuries. The injuries were severe. The decision was made to transport him by ambulance to Truman Medical Center in Kansas City. While medical personnel worked on Hart in the arena and while the ambulance transport was underway, the pay-per-view broadcast of Over the Edge continued. Matches proceeded. Commentary continued. The decision to keep the event running while the situation involving Hart was still unresolved generated significant public controversy in the days and weeks that followed. The live audience in the arena was aware of what had happened. The television audience largely was not until the information became public. At Truman Medical Center, medical staff received Hart and continued efforts to treat the injuries he had sustained in the fall. Those efforts could not succeed. Owen Hart was pronounced dead on May 23, 1999. The cause of death was internal injuries sustained when he struck the top rope of the wrestling ring after falling 78 feet from the rafters of Kemper Arena. He was 34 years old. His wife, Martha Hart, subsequently pursued legal action against the WWE in connection with his death. The case was settled out of court. If you want to see more, click the video on screen now.